The Legend of Aerrow Fionn, Absalom by Mychaila A. Rose. Narrated by Benjamin Fife. Prologue. They wanted to hear the tale of the Second God War. It was a strange request, but I didn't deny them of it, and went ahead with telling the version written by Valath Nor. It was, after all, the best one. It started a bit before the war, right at the very beginning, where there was nothing. There were no rocks, light, darkness, no order or chaos, no life and no death, just madness. Suddenly a light broke through, and with it, a darkness. Galaxies, stars, and planets started to form from these two forces, and along with them, two kingdoms were born. One from the light, the kingdom of Orithin, ruled by Orithin, the goddess of ideals, light, and life, and one from the darkness, the kingdom of Valor, ruled by her sister, Valordis, the goddess of truth, darkness, and death. The two sisters lived in peace within their respected kingdoms, balancing the other in strength and weakness throughout the vast, empty space. But with peace came conflict. Watching the objects shape in the void, planets of rock, gas, and ice formed around them, others being destroyed, swallowed by their suns or each other. The two became anxious, ambition to thrive more than what they were. They wanted more, a place like their own kingdoms. They came across a place of their desires, and on it they expanded. They created life, each in their own ways, the life cycling into death and giving forth new life. But they grew fearful. Their creations were so different from the others, an existence too trying to ignore. They didn't want to share the world with the other, but neither wanted to leave what they had started. They didn't want their creations to be destroyed by the other's power, and they didn't want to risk losing their creations on a world that couldn't suit their needs. Their fear grew to hatred, and a war raged across the world. The young creations took to the battlefield for years, thousands, millions, maybe thousands of millions of years. Time had become meaningless. The creatures could only grow old, evolve, change from the boons of their mothers to better adapt to their new world. Eventually, the light overtook the dark, and the world became known as Orithin, named after the victor. What the world had been named before had been lost to time. Unfortunately, unlike the name, the creatures that were left had not forgotten how they had come to be. The world, now only known for the violence, had divided the counterparts. The light had grown to only despise the darkness, and the dark now hated the light. The loss was not taken well by Valordis. The hatred for her sister had expanded to the creatures of light. They had been the reason why her creations were forced to hide or die. Her rage manifested, forming on the very planet as pits of anger and destruction for the light's will to end. The pits gave birth to creatures without souls. Their mission was a simple one. From the shadows, Valordis's attack commenced against Orithin and the world that she had taken from her. Years continued to crawl by, the deaths and destruction known, and after hoping for so long that Valordis would cease, to leave, Orithin had had enough. Within the world below, her creations had grown to become complex. Kingdoms had been created that weren't unlike the ideals of the kingdom they had derived from. Yet they were vastly different and spread out across Orithin, too far from being able to unite and stand against Valordis's ever-growing, never truly dying forces. On their own, the kingdoms tried to defend, but Valordis's anger only grew at the attempts, and her monstrous creatures mimicked her will. To grow and violently remove the light, that was a stain upon a beautiful world. And what good were mortal creatures of light against a wrathful goddess of death? Orithin came to terms on what needed to be done for the sake of her creatures. Valordis and her kingdom needed to be stopped, to be removed, just as permanently as her sister wanted the light gone. 6 heroes were chosen, one from each kingdom, and together they fought back against Valordis and her forces. Over the course of hardships, death, and sacrifice, they succeeded in defeating the goddess and her armies. The goddess of light told her sister to leave, to find a new world elsewhere within the vast void of space. But the goddess of darkness remained. She was still strong enough to oppose for the sake of petty vengeance. She kept her kingdom strong on the world, abusing the night and the crevasses that the creatures of light could never reach as her domain. Orithin, unable to remove the darkness, was forced to make a difficult truce with Valordis. The creatures of darkness could stay, if the death goddess did not influence her will upon them, and in return, the life goddess would do the same. A fragile setup at best, a truce known by many that it was not entirely for their creatures, a heavy thought of what their violent intents to kill each other could bring, a chaos that neither goddess wanted a part in if she won. And while a truce had been made between the sisters, their creations knew not of peace. They did not know how to coexist like their predecessors had. Some fought against the other, the light biting at the dark, and the dark clawed at the light. But neither goddess intervened. They allowed their creations to do as they pleased within the laws of nature they had been presented. To thrive on their own, to be greater than what the goddess could create for them. A great burden was brought home to the leaders on each side that day. The burden of knowing that the peace wasn't forever, waiting for the day when the truce was broken. Chapter 1. Sticks and Stones. I took a breather from the tale that I was pretty sure I recited perfectly. It wasn't a long story, one I had been told many times over, both within lessons and my own obsession with it long ago when my mother was putting me to bed. It would probably be a story I would eventually tell my own kids before they drifted off. That'd be the day. Not any time soon, though. The audience I had in front of me would get jealous. 6 little tots that both drove me up the wall and lightened up my day. Typical kids. They weren't monsters, most of the time. Lyric and Juno were pretty different compared to the others with their black hair. Siblings, they were close as they did everything together, sometimes even wore the same clothes. There wasn't much difference between them until recently, where Juno was now getting taller, her blue eyes no longer at eye level with Lyric's chocolate brown. Gasper sat next to them. He was a bit of an underdog to the rest of the group, being bolder and blunter than his peers, while also more likely to make a fool of himself in the process. It was difficult from time to time to figure out if his silliness was on purpose to make his friends feel better, or by accident. It was a silliness that often reached his grass-color eyes, that greatly contrasted his red hair. Holly and Caros weren't siblings, but their families were close enough, where they often seemed like it. Holly was clever and a bit manipulative to the males of the group, using her charm to get what she wanted. She stood out more than Juno and Lyric, with blonde hair and light grey-green eyes, which drew in much wanted attention. She was often instigating fights within the group, fueling jealousy in some form or another, passively and actively, depending on the day. There were fights I often had to defuse that, thankfully, as time had gone on, slowly became less frequent. Caros, on the other hand, was the quietest, speaking when he felt like he needed to say something, whether one of his peers had started to converse with him or not. His brown hair and passive light blue eyes made him easy to turn to for the others when I wasn't around and attending to duties, as he stayed neutral. Then there was Claudius. Clever wasn't even a word that could cover what he was. Know-it-all? Maybe. But I had a feeling even books felt ashamed to be in his presence, as he tore through them, both literally and figuratively. He compared them to other works he had read before just to see what inconsistencies he could find between the authors. He might have been 7, but I found it easier to talk to him about problems about court, more so than the actual members of court. Plus, I would receive a proper answer, though I wouldn't say he topped my father or the king's general most of the time. Oh, the court. Just replace the entire council, except for the general with Claudius, and things would get done at a reasonable pace without fighting for it. Suddenly, a pair of red eyes were directly in front of me, scaring me half to death. The white-haired child grinned as he knelt in front of me. "Welcome back, Aerrow." I rolled my eyes. I didn't go anywhere. "Physically, perhaps, but you were off in a different place in here," Claudius stated, poking my forehead, and I frowned, noticing an insult forming. "You have the attention span of a bee sometimes." Ow. I didn't have a clue on how long that was, but it probably wasn't long. "What do you want?" "Well, I was trying to get your attention, but you were off in space again for no reason." "Just thinking about things." I wasn't going to get into it. He already had an ego. "Don't you ditch the castle to avoid thinking about your duties and the people associated with them?" "On occasion, but today you guys forced me to come out here to tell you a story." "Forced is a bit much, don't you think? Be honest, you wanted to hang out with the best people in Shefra, if not all of Absalom." "You guys are the reason why I don't have any friends around my age." "That was mean." "You started it," I replied. The other 5 didn't seem overly hurt by my words, so I continued. "So you had some sort of inquiry?" "What's inquiry mean?" Lyric asked, reminding me that my vocabulary was placed too high for the others to understand. Claudius grinned again, knowing full well it was his fault that I was using adult language. Maybe that attention span comment wasn't so incorrect. I turned to the girl. "Inquiry means question." "Oh, then yes. How come the story is... What did you say after that, Claudius?" "Why was it the same?" The boy in question finished with a sigh. "A prince should have told us the real story, not the silly civilian version." "What's civilian mean?" "A person. People, sort of." "So I'm a civilian?" "Yes." She smiled happily, though I had no idea why. "So why did it stay the same, Aerrow?" Right, I needed to answer that. Wasn't sure if they, or rather Claudius, was going to be very happy about my answer. Because that's the story. It's a fable passed down, written, probably refined over time. Why would it be different? "I thought maybe you, being a prince, would have the real version," Claudius answered, and I shook my head. I knew of other versions, but they were roughly the same. The only other significantly different version I know of is not something I'm going to tell a bunch of 7-year-olds and a 6-year-old. "I can handle it," Gasper declared, and everyone turned to him. "What? I could." "Not in 100 years, kid. I don't think your parents would enjoy hearing that the prince told you that version of the story." "You'd get in trouble?" "But you—" "It would be irresponsible regardless if your parents could get me in trouble, which they can with a simple complaint. The king doesn't want his son to be a pain." "But you already are." Claudius coughed, and I gave him a dirty look. "Shush, you." "Just saying." Holly growled, grabbing our attention. "Stop being so mean to him. He doesn't have whatever you're looking for." "I'll stop pestering 'cause you're pretty," Claudius started, after a moment of thought. "But my quest for answers are only being put on hold, she-demon." "I'm not a—" Some of her hair was blown in her mouth by the wind, interrupting her, and I had to stifle a laugh as Claudius gave out a triumphant cackle. Not fair. Even the wind approves. That's because you're both evil, calling me a name I don't even know. How mean. Perhaps you should matriculate in acquiring a dictionary to understand jargon and terminology while you're still young. What are you even saying? Caros questioned, and I concurred. There were about 1,000,000 other ways to say that, and the simplest version was nowhere near that monstrosity of jumbled synonyms. Claudius, please use vocabulary your age group would understand. The sassy child rolled his eyes. Fine. What's a she-demon? Gasper asked, heading back onto the topic that I really wish they had left behind along with the fable. I saw Claudius going to explain, and I stopped him. I didn't know what definition he was going to put on the table. Not a name you should be calling your peers. Apologize. But they should... The boy started to argue before sighing, knowing he was not going to win. Sorry, Holly. Holly stuck her nose in the air, crossing her arms. Apology accepted, when you get me a lollipop. You honestly think I'm going to be bribed by a 7-year-old for approval? Yes, because you're also 7. Well, you're not wrong. Fine, I'll buy you a lollipop. I want a cherry one. Those are impossible to... Then your sorry is not accepted. I shook my head as the white-haired fellow grumbled, but reluctantly agreed. At least one thing could be said about the 6 of them. They were close friends. I was just the babysitter more than anything else. But they were funny and fun to be around. I never minded them begging me to go someplace, play whatever made-up game they wanted to try out. And, being a mediator, got them out of doing things that were way too dangerous for their own good. I came out of my head as Lyric tugged at my sleeve. I looked down to see grass covering bits of my white shirt, and Caros tossing another handful at me. I raised an eyebrow, and he stopped. Kids were brutal. Couldn't leave me to think on my own. I turned to Lyric. Aerrow? Lyric? Can you tell us the story again soon? Sure, if that's what you want. I didn't think I was that great at storytelling, but it was apparently good enough for the 6 here. But not today. It's getting close to the Dragon Knight trial. Already? I nodded and stood up as Claudius grumbled about not being able to be punctual when I was around. I stretched. Sitting in the grass wasn't that great of an idea. If I had stayed any longer, I could have dozed off, which would have been bad for more than one reason. I finished stretching and found that my pauldron wasn't sitting quite right, and the long sleeve of my shirt was bundled underneath it. I started to adjust the silver and gold-etched piece of armor, causing it to come out from behind my red cape, just at the right angle for the sun's light to bounce into my poor, unexpected eyes. I hissed in irritation. As if, like, the trial wasn't going to be hard enough as it was, and the sun just decided that I needed to be blind doing it. I felt someone staring at me, and I turned to see Gasper suspiciously looking up at me. I frowned. Is something the matter? Do I have grass in my hair? I went to brush out my red burgundy head, but stopped as the boy shook his head. No, I was just wondering why you have a weird eye color. Weird? We've known each other for over 2 years, and now you're finding it weird? It's not new that I've found it weird. I've just never been brave enough to ask until now. That's because Theseus and his dragon had Claudius started, catching me off guard entirely, but not enough to stop him before he could finish. Don't finish that thought. Inappropriate language. But is it true? Considering this is the first time I'm hearing of it, probably not. Why would you even think that? The redhead looked confused, looking back and forth between us. I'm so lost right now. What did the hero king do with his dragon? Won the battle against Valardis, I quickly answered, turning back to the crazy child. Well? I read it in a book, and then I cross-referenced it with other books.
Orange irises are associated with dragons, both Absalomian dragons and Outland ones. Absalomians, and really any other race, don't have this colour naturally except for the royal family of Absalom.
It can't be that uncommon among...
The only recorded cases of anyone other than a dragon having orange-coloured eyes are the 2 children of Theseus, Lomon and the Conqueror, the late king, Royari, both of which are dead, the king and his 2 siblings, King Solomon, Prince Lucius, and Princess Scarlet, 2 of which are dead, and the king's children, Princess Atlamelia and you.
Geez, just announce all my dead relatives without remorse.
They're dead. They've been dead long before you were even born.
Still...
Don't change the subject, bee-brain. Besides your family having a huge fatality rate, you also have a common eye and hair colour that doesn't care about who gets married into your family. And according to medical records, your family has the highest percentage of dragon blood out of every other Absalomian, which is enough to kill anyone that uses it, just like a dragon. So, what do you have to defend yourself?
While I didn't know 100% of what he was saying was true about my great-grandfather, possibly. Yeah, no, I didn't want to think about that. Wait. Oh, he thought he was just so clever. Those books you found could have been written by crazy conspiracy theorists. What evidence did they have? Shouldn't your other books tell you how populations grow? Dragons and Absalomians can't, Damn it. How could I say this without using whatever? He knew what I meant. Do that.
Well, yes, and of course I know they can't. But Orithin had given Theseus a gift as her chosen hero. The official Absalomian dragon. Not that other dragons aren't Absalomian, but the emblem of this kingdom. The same dragon that flies on flags, and the same one etched into your pauldron. They were made for each other. So I can see how the theories went that way.
So you actually believe that nonsense?
It has weight to it, especially when you investigate Theseus's own genetic traits. He didn't pass down that orange colour from his side. He had red eyes, just like yours truly. The orange came afterwards, and who better to fit that bill other than a dragon with that eye colour?
Who's to say that Argona had...
Because Day is the only other dragon to walk this earth that is white, tinted with silver, and red accents besides Argona, and she has orange eyes. Therefore, the same species, if you don't go by literally every depiction of the kingdom's emblem.
Right, she was the very same, wasn't she?
Wait, if the Hero King's dragon is like Aerrow's dragon, does this mean Aerrow is a chosen hero?
Juno asked, way too excitedly for my liking. Me, a chosen hero. Please. The grass was more heroic of the chosen kind.
You are.
I'm really not, I told her, and she frowned. It's the truth.
I don't believe you.
Why not?
Because you're my hero. You keep bullies away when we're playing.
I felt myself blushing slightly as I stammered, That's not heroic. It's basic common sense. I'm the prince. I'm supposed to look out for that sort of thing.
I mean, you could be a royal dick. It's not like that's not uncommon.
Claudius stated, only to be swatted by Holly.
Ow, why? Don't swear. Don't hit people, you uncivilized.
He was interrupted as Gasper shoved him.
Hey!
Don't call people names, Gasper growled. Enough, I stated, ceasing the incoming storm, and they stopped fighting. They were being a handful this morning, more than usual. Friends don't solve problems with physical contact, name-calling, or inappropriate language. Apologize. I received childish glares from the 3 of them in response before they apologized to each other. What a morning. At least they didn't hold grudges, yet. Something glinted in the grass by Claudius's feet, and I picked it up. The glint was a smooth purple-black stone with a yellow streak pattern across it. It wasn't something I had seen in Absalom. The rock colours in most of the kingdom were red and green, except for dragonstone, which was every colour. But this stone wasn't a dragonstone. It felt strange. A different kind of power that wasn't unlike dragonstone, but different. Perhaps it belonged to one of the kids, and they knew what it was. Does this belong to any of you? 6 pairs of eyes looked at the stone I held out, and Claudius took it from me.
It's mine. Must have fell out of my pocket.
What is it?
Clearly it's a mineral,
he stated sarcastically, before looking at the rock fondly.
Elias and Mychaila gave it to me in a truce. I haven't studied it yet, but it's pretty. Especially since it came from a couple of bullies. They actually gave us all a different mineral, so we wouldn't fight over whose was whose.
That was oddly nice of them. The other children took out their own stones, and they were indeed very different from one another. Different hues of purple, black. Some were closer to the green and red rocks that I was used to, while others were white or blue-tinted, definitely not from around the area. Surprisingly, they all had the same yellow stripe-like pattern on their surfaces. They're interesting. Did they say where they got them? Juno shook her head, looking away from her blue stone.
Nope, but I've never seen anything like it around here. Daddy said it looked like it came from Seraphina's floating kingdom, since a lot of the rocks there are blue.
I doubt those 2 even stepped foot outside the walls.
There's no way those 2 could have made a trip all the way to Seraphina.
Karos growled, and she pouted.
That's just what my daddy said.
My mom said that my stone looks like it was from fiery something. It's glass-like, Gasper added, and Karos looked at him in disbelief. What? It's what she said. The brown-haired boy stomped the ground with his foot. I had never seen him so worked up before.
There is no way those 2 poop-heads went all the way across the ocean and then across a continent just to get to Fiery. Well, if you cross the Vascanatic Ocean, you would only have to cross our kingdom since the walls go all the way to the ocean on the west coast,
Claudius pointed out, forcing an image of the map to form in my head to fact-check him.
And as large as that ocean is, compared to the Akira-Yu Ocean, it would be safer and probably faster to go that way. Also, the mineral isn't obsi, it is obsidian, a volcanic glass. That specific type of obsidian, if it is that mineral, is called vigorid obsidian. Due to its red-black color, this type of mineral can only be found in Fiery, due to their volcano. Nowhere else has that kind of obsidian.
Karos scoffed. Which it isn't, even if my mom said mine was from rock. Those 2 didn't travel anywhere just to give us some rocks.
They're minerals.
I don't care what they're called. I hope that if they are from some stupid other place, they paid for them from a merchant and spent way more than what they're worth. It's not like I forgive them. I only took the rock because it was pretty.
That's mean,
Holly muttered. They're mean. I was silent on the subject, but I agreed with Karos. Elias and Mychaila were 2 walking, talking mosquitoes, and, like mosquitoes, they wouldn't leave until you swatted them hard enough, which was annoying. I hated fighting, but some people just didn't know anything else.
Is it weird that all the rocks, minerals, whatever, come from the 6 kingdoms?
Lyric asked, ending the argument and drawing me out of my thoughts.
Because mine is from Dagda, and Holly's is a dragonstone, unless there are other stones that glow like that. If that's the pattern, that would mean my mineral is from Pegasus, or rather Kasai, the island turtle that the Pegasus kingdom lives on.
Claudius pondered.
I don't know if that's the case, though. I've never studied anything about the composition of minerals found there. Huh, there is something Claudius doesn't know.
Holly mocked mercilessly.
My parents have been to the kingdom of Pegasus. There is a stone like that on my fireplace.
The boy growled in annoyance.
I don't know everything, and that is a sign of true wisdom. Also, it's not a stone, it's a mineral. Whatever.
I laughed slightly at their antics. They were cute, even when they were going to quickly devolve into ripping each other apart with words if they continued. My smile faded as I looked over their stones. They may have been from around the world, but if it was that, why would they have the same streak? It shouldn't have been possible for them to have the same streak if they were from different parts. I knew that different continents had moved throughout time, land masses connecting where they don't connect now, and some of those rocks would be the same, but Kasai was never connected with any landmass. Serafina was a floating island, far from any coasts, and even then, all the kingdoms were found inland. The rock composition changed drastically within Absalom, as it was much bigger, though it wasn't originally as big, but it still did its best to avoid continental shelves, in fear of Outland Monsters abusing their unstable rifts. I thought on it more as I looked back at the map in memory. The only place where 5 of the continents could have connected was the Makanoga continent, in the center of Akirayu. Legend stated that it hadn't moved from the center of Orithin, somehow magically locked in place over top of the crossing of Orithin's ley lines. The thought of the rocks all being naturally made as they were now became more absurd by the second. The likely answer of why they had some streak was because they were defaced by Elias and Mazea, probably with magic to place a signature on it or something. Either way, I was more than sure that those 2 annoyances didn't travel too far from the city, let alone outside of the kingdom for some rocks. They were cowards, picking on kids 10 years younger, and as funny as it would be to watch them fight even a small Marsutsepi-classed Outland monster, I knew they wouldn't try on their own. That being said, they had signed up to participate in the Dragon Knight trial. Maybe they had grown up? Probably not by much in the last week, but one could hope.
"What you frowning at, Aerrow?"
Karos asked, interrupting my thoughts. I looked over at him and found that he wasn't the only one staring. I must have really zoned out again. I needed to stop doing that. Nothing, just a bit curious on where they got their yellow streak.
"Doesn't matter,"
someone shouted from above, and I looked upwards just as the sun came from behind some clouds, blinding me a second time, blocking whoever was coming.
"Hand over the stones."
Something dropped at my feet, and I looked down to see a cylinder pop open, sending out pools of thick smoke into the air.
"Hey! What the hell are you 2 bastards doing?"
Claudius screamed from some place in the smoke, before having a coughing fit.
"Don't say bad words,"
Juno scolded him before screeching,
"Hey, give that back."
"I thought you guys were done being jerks," I called out to the dastards before giving out a cough. I picked up the cylinder that was tossed and vaguely read that it was dragon smoke. A small sigh came out. At least it would blow away shortly. "Seriously, this is a new low for even you 2, and technically treason. Can't you just try to be civil for once?"
"Is it really treason if you're barely qualified as royal material, Fionn?"
The same voice from earlier, Elias, asked close by, and I tried to grab at it, but didn't catch the culprit. "You know the O is silent, and it doesn't matter if you think I'm qualified or not, so how about you stop hiding?"
"Don't have time for chit-chat, Prince. Now, if it was your sister,
she'd punch you in the throat," I growled surprisingly aggressively, and the male went silent as I heard dragons above. The smoke cleared slightly, allowing me to see silhouettes of 2 dragons leaving before the sniffles of children came to my ears. All right, enough was enough. This needed to end for good. I called for my other half mentally. Dang. A familiar wing beat came to my ears, and a few moments later the smoke was cleared away with the kids in a disarray in the grassy plain of one of the many parks in Shefra. I turned to the cause of the wing beat to see the 25-foot-long, white, silver, and red dragon I had called land next to me gracefully. The exact opposite to what I would have done if I was a dragon. probably a blessing that I wasn't one. I'd be a mess, and
I accidentally take a nap with all the little dragons, and this is what happens? A sneak attack, and you fantasizing over how awful you'd be as a dragon.
But is it true?
Yes, being a dragon has a sense of honor and grace, and you'd be stumbling over your own claws.
That was when you were supposed to disagree. Never mind. You didn't happen to see some friends on the way over?
The malice went in the direction of their little fort. But what's the point of going after them? Just send the guard and call it a day. The smoke could be toxic next time.
It would just look bad for the king. Let's just go deal with this now, and give them the one and only warning of what will happen next time.
Or I could just eat them.
No, wait, you can't.
I sighed.
You can't eat our people.
Just thought I'd suggest it. It'd be weird to eat someone, but for the past year now they've been tempting me, and I still have growing to do.
You can't just eat your problems away.
Watch me. Food is always the solution. Food is life.
The conversation, that was only a few seconds, was interrupted by Gasper as he rushed over to me.
Aerrow, they took our stones.
I looked down at him in disbelief.
They took them back?
Yes. A sob came from him as he was trying his best to keep his emotions together, but was failing miserably.
They were so different from anything in Absalom, and they just... Why'd they do that?
I didn't have an answer for him, keeping a sigh to myself. Great. It was one thing to constantly pick on the kids. It was another to lie to them after trying to make a truce, and then ripping away the gifts they had given. Just another scummy thing to add to their reputation. I wanted to tell Gasper that they were just stones, and that anything from those two weren't worth getting upset over, regardless of how different or pretty they were. But the look he made me rethink my words. It wasn't just Gasper that was upset over the thieving act. All right, I'll go and get your stones. Claudius coughed. Minerals. In the meantime, you should all head home. It's getting close to the trial, so I'll see you in the stadium.
All right,
Gasper sighed. And don't stick around like last time and make your parents worry. Go home for real, I told them, somewhat sternly, to make sure that they knew I wasn't kidding around. I leaped on Days back. We were just in a park, but the children were reckless, to say the least. And do it safely?
We will,
Lyric said happily, as 6 little dragons appeared behind them. At least they had their partners. I watched the chaos unfold, not being able to warn them as Day took off with red and silver wings. The little dragons slipped on the grass as they tried to stop before crashing into the children. I winced. That wasn't what I meant by safely.
They're fine,
Day commented, reading my thoughts. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt.
Oh, it probably did. And that right there was a good example of what you would be like as a dragon, except fully grown.
That's just mean.
The truth hurts.
She purred, and I shook my head, sighing.
You can prove me wrong if somehow you get the ability to be a dragon.
Challenge accepted. Chapter 2. Minerals. The children and their dragons quickly disappeared as Day flew up high, showing off the view of the land around us. Mountains, the far distant kingdom wall to the north, even the city we were in appeared brilliantly in the slightly cloudy day. From this high up, I could see that the mountains and valleys that carved themselves into the land on the inside part of the kingdom were just as beautiful as the ones on the other side, but barely, probably due to the concept of the grass being greener on the other side. Nothing seemed to move out in the distance to the north, which was good. If I could have seen something, then it would have been huge, and that wouldn't be a good thing. But even if there was nothing out there at all, the thought of going out there terrified me. I hated it out there, outside of the walls. If I was ever outside, which was very infrequently and never for very long, it was never in one space or near any pits that could be hiding. The whole world was out there, and I wanted nothing to do with it. Day, on the other hand, loved the interesting fish that we could catch, and there wasn't any way I was letting her go on her own. Not even to our safe island surrounded by the ocean, even if I was scared every time we left the kingdom walls. I turned away from the north wall as she continued towards the mountain range, quite a bit outside of Shefra's walls and outskirts. But the thought wouldn't abandon my head. Out there was dangerous, but I couldn't entirely abandon the want to leave, to enjoy what laid outside and explore it. I wanted to rip that part from me. It was the part that never learned better from the past, why adventures and magic were dangerous. They were capable of hurting people. I turned my attention to Day. You ever get the feeling of wanting to go someplace, but every sense in your body tells you no? Not with places, but with food, which is why you don't see me eat chocolate. I love everything about it, but as a dragon, as soon as it's in my system, it never sits right, and you'll never catch me eating that modified trash for dragons. She sighed. The disappointment I felt from her couldn't be covered with words. That stuff is the worst thing in food existence, and needs to be sent off into space, hurling towards the sun so it can be incinerated. That's a bit excessive for a food that most, if not all, dragons like, except for you. I'm a dragon who is partnered with the Prince of Absalom. There are standards, she declared strongly, before I noted a shift in her demeanor. You want to go out exploring again, don't you? I go out there enough for you, I answered with some hesitance. Maybe a little today, but no, I'm needed here. Are you sure? Your thoughts say otherwise. I don't regret abandoning those childish desires. There was an awkward silence between us as I tried to make my words the truth, but that same small, disgusting part regretted my decisions. A cave opening appeared in the mountain that we grew close to, ending the atmosphere that I had set. Now it was time to see if anyone was home, hopefully settle this nonsense without having to get physical. Day went in with a swift landing. I jumped off and landed on the smooth red-green stone floor. Muffles that I presumed were yelling came from farther inside with the question of why they were yelling. It would be a first to find them arguing. I looked up at Day, but she shook her head, unable to provide an answer. Guess we were going to find out. I walked inside, and like every time we had entered, I was amazed. The space that we were greeted with was simply mesmerizing, which was also the same feeling that had rekindled the pieces I hated so much. The side of the cave opened a few meters in, every so often showing valleys and mountains off in the distance and below Dragon Mountain Range. Plants and trees grew out of the rock, warping to assist their weight, hooked into the edges of the openings like vines. Flowers, unable to grow naturally in the rock, grew on the trees and small patches of dirt, where soft grass and moss grew. Waterfalls within the valley were quiet from where I was, but I was sure that they weren't if we were closer. Bits of light came from tiny holes in the ceiling and openings, giving separations between the heavy moss versus the grass. Where the light didn't shine, luminescent bugs glowed on the ceiling and walls, making the cave feel like it couldn't decide between a starry night and day. The cave, though, something Day and I could agree on, was a place that would never be dark, no matter how dark it was outside, even if we hadn't been there in the night to confirm the theory. Our steps echoed, clicking off the smooth stone as we started to leave the fantasy world, but still being brightened by bugs. It was amazing how much there was to see when I wasn't so high up. It was probably one of the only good things that Elias and Mychaila had done for me, giving me a view I wouldn't have ever known was within the kingdom. Who knew what else laid in between the walls? My thoughts were interrupted by the yelling getting much louder, and I sighed. If the space wasn't already taken by two ruffians, it would have made a really good place to escape for a time. There might not have been places to sun for day, but the view was spectacular. We entered the third segment of the cave, and the source of the noise was revealed. Elias and Mychaila were arguing at a table where the 6 stones suffered in the middle. I went to announce that we were there when the senseless words became intriguing. Elias ran his fingers nervously through his dark brown hair as he started asking his blonde friend in exasperation,
"How do you not remember what they looked like?"
"Why are you putting this on me?" Mychaila huffed in irritation, readjusting himself in his chair. "You were there too."
"You were there longer."
"Even if we put them back, we don't know if the weird shit will stop." I looked over at Day. What weird things? I hadn't seen or heard of anything as of late. Their argument continued.
"Well, they started when we pulled them out. Why wouldn't it?"
I noticed that their argument was just going to circle, and my ears had heard enough the first time. I cleared my throat. They screamed out a noise I didn't think was possible for them to make, and Mychaila fell out of his chair. These two. "Did you forget that you just ambushed me and the kids? We've done this how many times over the past year, and you didn't expect me?" Elias's voice cracked.
Shut up!"
I sighed, changing the subject. "What were you two talking about a moment ago?"
"None of your business."
Rude. It's my kingdom, so it would be my business about what happens within the borders. Or did you forget that too?
"We don't have to tell you anything."
Mychaila stood up, purposely trying to make himself look like he was worth something. It was cute how much he was trying, considering that I was a couple of inches taller, and he had been on the floor a moment ago.
"Get lost."
I didn't want to do this, but you've given me no choice. You're going to tell me what you are talking about, or I'm going to have you two arrested, and then you don't get to participate in the trial.
"You haven't yet. Why should we?"
Your latest stunt was quite the jump in aggression. Using compressed smoke, Day was wondering when that smoke was going to be toxic and was about to get the guard. I'm the only reason why you're not sitting in a cell, I growled. Their condescending tone, with the hypercritical attitude, just reminded me of the council. If they wanted to piss me off quickly, they were doing a fine job of it. You're picking on children at least 10 years younger, and have constantly been causing trouble, which is just disgraceful, and giving the kingdom a bad name. So, is this going to resolve without interference, or is that too much to hope for?
"A disgrace, have you?"
"Pick your next words carefully," Day threatened, "or I might eat you."
"Eat me?"
"Yes, so what's it going to be? Eaten, arrested, or an explanation against the oath you made to those kids, and whatever you are talking about?"
All right,
Elias gave in.
"But only because Tatian and Manuel aren't here."
A smug look formed on her face, and I just shook my head. She got way too much enjoyment out of playing the bad guy. Probably from all the fable books we had been reading as of late, nostalgia of younger days. I turned my attention back to them. "What are the strange happenings you were talking about?"
"There have been strange creatures, spirits almost, moving around at night. A few people have gone missing. Some of them even having their pets disappeared or slaughtered."
"Disappearances? And pet murders? I haven't heard about this in the capital. Mychaila scoffed. Well, the whole kingdom doesn't take place in just the capital. A couple of villages and hamlets around the mountain and valley here are the ones that are having the problems. How many are you talking about? Enough to be considered weird. I consider one weird, so how many? All of them, Elias answered, and I barely contained my surprise. All 4 of them. It's only a matter of time before this weird shit starts hitting home. From what I heard, a neighbour hasn't been seen after he had gone for a walk with his dragon 2 days ago, and they live near the edge of the city just inside the walls from here. Maybe they've already arrived. I really hoped he was trying to make me paranoid, and that wasn't the case. The kingdom hadn't had any monster invasions within the last 2 decades, and they were along the borders, not so far inland. The people weren't prepared or used to trouble. I was going to have to investigate this more, not because they were a credible source, but because the mountain we stood in felt weird. Then again, it could have been a suggested feeling. What did I know? Day gave a small shake of her head as she confirmed that maybe there was something off. She had a higher sensitivity to magic compared to me. All right, so what does this have to do with the stones? Everything. All this shit started when we pulled them out, so it makes sense that if we put them back, everything will return to normal. I gave a side look to her as the same thought crossed her mind. How do the stones matter to weird monster? It's the truth. Maybe if you weren't always daydreaming and wandering about, you'd know that there were weird things happening, and they didn't just come from nowhere. I attended some of the meetings and court dealings recently, in fact, I growled. Not that I have to justify it to you, and whatever I missed, Atlamelia would have informed me. Obviously this hasn't become important enough for you royals to care about then. While I wanted to counter, the statement was truer than what I would have liked. The council, if they got their hands on things first, often didn't tell the king, Atlamelia, and certainly not me about certain matters. Things were either not important enough to inform us right away, or somehow that thing got out of their control, which was often. Fine, maybe I could put some faith into their claim, and let them tell the rest of the story. Where are you sticking these stones back? Why? Because if this is all a ruse, I'm taking them back to those kids. It's not a... You know what, fine. You'll see what we mean. This way, Prince Aerrow. They really knew how to push me over the edge. Thankfully, I had self-control to keep me from reaching to their instigation. The 2 of them rounded up the stones on the table, and then started walking into a different segment of the cavern, much deeper inside. Hesitantly, I followed, not knowing what to expect since they had the advantage. Day stuck close to me, purposely keeping her head by mine as a defense. We caught up to them, and found a smaller hallway that had lanterns lighting up the pathway, which separated into several other directions into the mountain. Elias and Mychaila turned down another cavern. How we were going to get ourselves out of the cave without getting lost if they abandoned us was going to be a bridge to cross when we got there. A few more minutes of silence rolled by, and I grew anxious. What's so special about this place? We've gone through this place several times over, but this cave just appeared there overnight, Mychaila answered, and Day was skeptic. Caves don't just appear out of thin air. This one did, and inside was a strange altar thing. And you messed around with it? I questioned, in disgust. It didn't matter if there shouldn't be anything up here that was of some special importance or not. What mattered was if there was, they just went ahead and desecrated it without a thought. What's wrong with you? What do you mean by that? The place is ancient. No one could have a care. You can't just go and destroy things, regardless if they are in use, and especially if it's historical in nature.
Well, it's not like someone would have moved this place into a museum. That's not the point. Calm down, Prince. Elias started looking back at me. It's just a place, and if you work yourself up now, what will you do if a monster shows up? Maybe use you to pummel it? I growled before taking a breather. He was annoying, but he had a point if there was going to be some sort of attack. Even if the likeliness of it happening was 0. The walls were there, and protected for a reason. Do you actually care about your actions? What is there to care about, other than people might be getting hurt? It's just some ancient place of worship or something. It's not like we actually sacrificed someone. Relax. You only care then because you don't want their blood on your hands. Day hissed before turning her words inward. No respect. I agreed with her before changing the subject. How much farther? Just around the corner, Prince. Elias answered as Mychaila turned into another cavern segment. I pushed past my hesitance as I followed. I already felt like I had lost which way to go, even though my experience with navigating stated I would be fine. The small thought of being lost remained. The cavern tunnel ended at a dead end like a setup where the wall had crumbled into a dark opening, almost as if someone had blasted into it, knowing there was something behind it. Unsettling, since the rock here seemed pretty solid. The two of them led us into the room, and I looked down to make sure I wouldn't trip over myself, or something by accident, only for them to stop suddenly as they turned on a lantern. They dropped the stones with a gasp. I moved past them slightly, not bothering to look at their dramatic tension as I got out of the way and Day barely fit through the entrance. When I did look, it was not what I had expected at all. A single lantern lit up the gloomy, uncomfortable room, where a headless, naked corpse of a man hung from the ceiling by their ankles. Blood still dripped slightly from the lacerated neck onto a circle that was carved into the stone floor. The circle was surrounded by 6 equally spaced indents, which I guessed where the stones were supposed to sit. Drawings covered the walls in forms that I had never seen before, with runes that I thought I recognized but couldn't place. Blood spatter marks covered and almost mimicked the dried-up blood on the walls from a past act. The liquid interrupted the drawings and dripped into pools on the floor that flowed like a stream back into the circle. A shiver went up my spine. This place was wrong. Besides the obvious dead body in the middle of the room, something felt unnatural, like the stone I was holding earlier. What did you two do? Day questioned mercilessly at the 2 others in the room, drawing me out of my head. Elias looked back in shock, paler than a sheet. You think we did this? How else? She didn't get to finish as Mychaila went past her in a hurry, and started throwing up just outside the room. I almost joined him as the body started to come to terms in my head. Elias's pale shock turned into a sickly green, but he held himself together as he closed his eyes. Stop vomiting before you make the rest of us sick. There's a body. Mychaila choked, his voice cracking as he looked back at us. There wasn't a bloody body here an hour ago. People don't string themselves up and cut off their heads by themselves, I pointed out, looking around, and carefully avoided eye contact with the obvious object hanging. Object, yes, much better to deal with. My eyes landed on a rounded object in the darkest corner of the room, and I went over to it, watching my step. Where the hell are you going? There's something over here, I replied, and pulled out my sword. I wandered closer to it, but the light was doing nothing to reveal what it was. I didn't want to hurt it if it was a living thing. I thought of maybe lighting up the space better, but disregarded the idea completely, as it required magic, and flipped the blade. I carefully grabbed my blade in my gloved hand and prodded the sphere with the pommel. It didn't move, and I nudged it again. Your Majesty, If you could stop fucking playing with whatever is over there.
Elias practically begged me, which was a surprise, since I thought he would have abandoned me by now.
We got to go.
I put my sword back in its sheath, noting the blood that was painted on the top of the pommel, and knelt down, picking up the sphere. My fingers slipped through strands of something, causing it to slap the ground like a wet cloth before rolling into the light, stopping almost in the center of the circle, below the body. Dead, grey eyes, slightly rolled back, stared directly through me, a jaw slightly ajar as it seemed to scream silently for eternity at whoever had killed him. There was a scream from Elias as I seemed to register what I had touched. The eyes stared back, and the smell hit me hard as the shock started to wear off. Ammonia, mixed with a metallic scent, dissolved the cave smell I thought I had been smelling all along. My stomach twisted, and I swiftly found the wall nearby, emptying what little I had left of my breakfast.
What did I miss?
Mychaila asked, and I looked up just in time for him to walk back into the cave slightly. He looked down before promptly walking out. The sounds of vomiting echoed back in, and I puked a second time from my gagging. Couldn't just stay out there, could ya? He started speaking between coughs as I tried to recover.
Why is there a head? How many people?
I started taking a breather as the smell tried to end me.
Do you know, without a head? They could have taken it with them.
Elias wiped his mouth. I hadn't noticed he had also emptied his stomach on the far wall.
This is disgusting. Who is this guy?
I looked slightly back at the head, but I closed my eyes, turning away from the mess. I had no idea who this was.
Any ideas, Prince?
I shook my head as the dripping noise I hadn't noticed came to an eerie stop. I looked back at the circle carved into the ground, and found that the body stopped dripping. Suddenly a cold gust of wind came from it, followed quickly by a sense of dreaded hopelessness and despair. The circle started to glow as Elias and Mychaila screamed, leaving the area. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wandered over to it. What was this thing? My question didn't get answered, as a noise came from everywhere and nowhere that sounded like "run," and I didn't stick around to ask it why. Day and I rushed out of the cavern. We only got a few feet from the entrance as the mountain started to shake violently, and we managed to get to the end of the section before I lost my footing, landing hard on the ground. The sounds of crashing rock came from everywhere, and I covered my head, hoping for the best. The mountain stopped shaking just as suddenly as it came, and I looked back to see that the rock breaking and crashing came from behind us, completely sealing the entrance to the awful cave. I got to a stand, and Elias and Mychaila came from around the corner. They looked a bit scratched up, but fine.
What took you so long to leave? What could you have left behind?
Elias growled at me.
It's nice to know you care.
I cheekily replied, only to get glares back.
Why did you stick around?
Yes, Day scoffed at me. Why did you stick around and get closer to the circle? It could have killed you. Mychaila stared at me with disbelief.
You went closer to the beaming light of death. Why?
I wanted to know what it was, I muttered quietly, turning back to the wall of rock. And you too, Day growled, making me look back at the group, as she was not done scolding. Why did you think it was a good idea to take anything from in there?
Did you not see those rocks?
Mychaila answered the question with a question.
How could we not?
I didn't see the rocks, and I doubt that they were worth taking from that place.
There wasn't a dead guy when we took them.
Did you miss the dried blood on every surface then? Unless, of course, you did sacrifice something in there.
It was just a weird cavern. How were we supposed to know it was messed up?
Dried blood. I took the silence that followed to think. It was quite apparent that they had nothing to do with the murder, and the altar was not of their creation. The carvings in the ground were too precise, not to mention the work on the walls. Whatever the place was, it wasn't in my studies, and as far as I knew, didn't exist. But it did. Whether or not it existed now was up to debate. It was possible Father knew of it. I was going to have to tell him about this. Why was it sealed up behind that solid stone wall? It was more than a couple of meters thick at the entranceway. If Elias and Mychaila hadn't noticed it before, it was probably solid and matched the rest of the mountain walls. At least, I hoped that was the case, and I wasn't putting too much faith in their observation skills to get into trouble. So if the stones had come from the altar, the smaller indents around the circle, what was their purpose? I couldn't bring one back for someone to study it, since Elias and Mychaila dropped them when discovering the body. What was the consequence of removing them? Who was the man hanging, and why was he murdered? Or maybe ritualistically sacrificed was the better question. And the dried blood from before, how old was it? What or who else was killed in there, and for what purpose? These questions weren't going to answer themselves, and unfortunately probably not until that cavern was excavated, if it could be excavated at all. There could be aftershocks after an earthquake like that, if it was an earthquake at all. There were more questions that I could ask back in Shefra, which hopefully wouldn't leave me with even more questions than answers.
Oh, damn it!
Elias started, reminding me that I wasn't alone. He went through his pockets, looking for who knows what. I turned to him. What is it?
The trial is starting soon.
Right, that was today. We're not that far from the capital.
And I lost 2 of my explosives someplace in here.
Explosives? Why do you have explosives on you?
For the trial, obviously. You think I'd just go in with only a sword?
Yes, honestly, I thought that's exactly what he was going to do. Strategy wasn't what I thought of when it came to Elias. He started counting the small cylinders, no bigger than several centimeters, which I recognized as not simple explosives.
Are you trying to blow everyone up? I don't want to take chances. You have enough to blow up 1/5 of the arena. I call it effective neutralization.
And now there are 2 stranded someplace around here?
Or other places. I've been busy today.
Sweet gods above.
Wait, I found them.
I growled as the number of horrible things that could have happened due to his carelessness grew in my head. Strategic, I took back my compliment. Get a bomb bag or something before someone gets hurt. How did you even get those?
Traveling weapon vendor, a couple months back. Saved them for this very special occasion.
I just sighed. Let's just go. Your stupid stunt earlier upset the kids you promised you wouldn't pick on anymore, and they need rocks. Not to mention the altar needs to be told to someone.
Yeah, about that. We got to get ready, so we'll see you later,
Mychaila stated, and the 2 of them took off down the twists and turns before I could even register what he had said.
Bye, Prince.
Hey, you can't just... I started, before giving up. I wasn't chasing after them. I had better things to do besides trying to find them, just to drag them to a barrack and explain the situation that Day and I were more than capable of doing on our own. Plus, it'd probably be faster since we could explain everything to the king. The privileges of being the prince. I had supper with the king basically every night. We started walking back through the tunnels and caverns. I could collect new stones for the kids before finding my father. Hopefully, before the trial. Think we have time to do that? Day nodded next to me. We should have time. The only challenge will be finding your father before the trial. He'll be in the booth, so even if we can't find him before, we know where he'll be afterwards. And while I would like to think this murder is a little more important than the trial, it would be easier if the council wasn't there telling me otherwise. We'll be fine even if they are. A murder is more important to bring up than delaying the trial for a few minutes at most, while a plan to deal with this is made. Oh, if only that was the problem. She would have been fine with them and their nagging, but I didn't have the same tolerance to them like she did, especially when they started to express more than what they should. The king gave them way too much freedom sometimes. Chapter 3. Shefra. We finally exited the cave through one of the open sides once we got to the main portion. The fresh and open air felt nice physically, but it didn't really do much to ease my mind of what I saw. It should have been easier. I was participating in a trial to be a dragon knight within the hour, and while I was a prince, the knight part was kind of important. It meant protecting people, and sometimes I knew things tended to get violent and messy. I could always imagine myself in something unpleasant and think I'd be all right. But when presented with the scenario, I ended up puking at the crime scene. I was fine. The body was fine. Touching the head, Day didn't want me touching her until she sterilized my glove with her flames, which was a fair trade. Being fireproof, I could handle her white-blue fire. Honestly, I wouldn't want me touching her with anything like that either. None of those things bothered me to that tipping point. But his stare did me in. Did all dead people look so unfocused, but also stared into the depths of your existence? No answer came from Day or my head. A small sigh escaped my lips. I probably wouldn't have bothered being a dragon knight if it wasn't expected of me. It was part of our culture, history, and my duty specifically. There was a time when I wanted to be one, but that was almost 13 years ago. Dreams and perspectives on life change. I rubbed Day's scales, and they flecked slightly, demanding attention. I rubbed a little more before asking my question. "How are you doing?" "Fine. You?" "Grossed out. Are you sure you're fine?" "I tend to enjoy my food gory, so yes." "He wasn't some cow or... that was a person." "I'll be honest with you, it was sickening, but I'm fine. I've prepared to deal with this kind of thing." Prepared and actually seeing it are two very different things. "Yes, your stomach, I think, would agree." I sighed as I looked over the landscape. She looked back at me slightly before dropping rapidly, causing me to lose my stomach before ascending again. A cheeky smile was on her face as I glared slightly at her. "Don't think too hard on the night business. Not everyone is born with a solid stomach for seeing a murder for the first time." "It'll be nice if I never have to see another corpse again," I grumbled, and noticed something on the peak of a lower mountaintop. "Hey, down there. I think I see some stones the kids might like." "On it." Day landed quickly onto the mountain peak, and my findings were conclusive as rocks dotted it, just barely out of the melted snow. The two of us started picking different rocks that each of the kids would like the most. They weren't as widespread in color like the other rocks had been, but each of the ones I picked out had different patterns of red and green, or were strictly red or green. The red one being for Claudius, while the green one was for Gasper. Those were their favorite colors. After making sure we had the rocks, we left and headed towards the stadium. Tall buildings appeared in the valley below as we flew over a ridge. The buildings mingled with plant life that bloomed and grew along the side of the winding streets and parks, giving color to the stones and cement. Blossoms from cherry trees especially stood out from the bright green. The buildings that decorated the city were nothing compared to skyships that were docking into the skyport just west of the main wall of the city, near the great lone Hammond Mountain. The central military power of the Dragon Knights laid inside of the fort of the same name. The train yard sat between the two of them. Both forms of transportation were busy with many coming in from across the kingdom and elsewhere for the Dragon Knight trial and week-long Anaxiver festival. The fort seemed dormant, which was always a good sight to see. Back inside the main walls, as day flew northeast, a large spire stood tall just east of it, glowing even in the bright day, as it was covered in dragonstone. A large walled-off garden sat in the middle of Shefra, taking up a quarter of the city, was filled with tall trees even larger than the houses and buildings on the other side. From above, lakes and streams were dotted throughout the garden, no doubt not left abandoned, as it was a popular spot to play for kids and adventurers looking for some safer exploration with its strange wonder. Then there was the castle to the north, with the north wall well in view from our height far above. It was massive, with the highest central tower wielding the emblem of the kingdom on a pillar, looking over the capital. Though I wasn't entirely sure if the dragon was looking over the city fondly or intimidatingly. Dragons and people were moving below us towards unknown destinations, though a good portion of them were heading towards the large stadium that sat just outside the eastern wall of Shefra. Northeast of it laid mountains where Orithina's temple laid somewhere within it, but I only knew of where it was for the sake of knowing, having no interest in actually going any time soon. Many people were coming from its direction, probably from seeing the temple and doing whatever people did in the religious, historical site before the trial. It wasn't exactly far and technically within city limits. People could take a train there for faster travel from the city, but it was on its own land. The only thing around Orithina's mountains were priests' and priestesses' living quarters, and the temple itself, with the matron living in the temple. I didn't mind the capital usually. Even though it was the most populated city in the kingdom, it never seemed crowded, with the exception of the few big festivals. The city was close to 25,000 square kilometers. Though including surrounding areas, it was closer to 30,000. With that amount of space, there were a lot of places to go, with a population close to 150,000 citizens, half being dragons and the other half Absalomian. Today, though, it was crowded, with the growth starting a few days ago, and I didn't doubt that it would continue as the festival went on. It was around this time that the Second God War ended. Or at least, that's what the king had explained it long ago when I had asked, and why the festival was a week long. The mythical time was over 2,000 years ago, and while the king was old, he wasn't that old, so there could have been other reasons, like partying. People liked drinking for some reason for the occasion. I preferred all the prizes I could try and win at the not-rigged games. There was something satisfying about watching the smug vendors who had been scamming money all week to lose all their arrogant confidence, along with their prizes. Day's quick descent reminded me that we were on a mission, and I focused again. Below us was the large stone, oval, open stadium coming closer, where the sounds of thousands of people came to my ears. People came and went, mostly going in, either from the sky or through the entrances. Day flew over the wall and went into the arena. The walls, on the outside and in, were decorated in Absalomian knots, a design of infinite lines intertwining and never beginning or ending. I looked towards the royal booth to find it empty. Expected, but irritating. We were just going to have to wait. She flew lower, towards the spectators, and I tried to ignore the noise. I didn't know why the crowd made so much noise, but it was loud and I wasn't fond of it. They were excited. Some of them recognized Day as part of the royal house, but I couldn't get into the same mindset that they had. They had no idea that someone across the city and over a few mountains had been brutally murdered. It was too bad, even though I wasn't a fan of being a part of the event. I had been excited for the yearly event, and now that it was my turn, all I could think about was who had killed that person. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything I could do at that very moment. Rocks clinked in the bag behind me, sending a friendly reminder of the replacements we found. The kids should have been in the stadium by now if Claudius had anything to say about it, but where would they be? Day went to the next section, and I caught sight of white hair in the mass of relatively normal hair colors, and Day turned around. My assumption was correct, as Claudius noticed, and started waving us down. Day landed on the railing, balancing on it like a cat, and I got off with the bag. 6 little bundles of energy piled in front of me with their dragons close by. I looked up from them to see that the parents hopefully weren't far with Claudius's mother, Tetra, waving to notify me that she knew they had wandered over to me before returning to a conversation with the other parents. It was nice to see that they got some socializing time during the festival. I knew Holly's father, Captain Delram Teague, was a dragon knight, so he wasn't home very often, bouncing around the different forts in the area. But there he was, enjoying a beverage with the others. How nice. I turned back to the kids who were eager to find out what happened.
"Did you beat them up?"
Gasper asked, way too happily, and I shook my head.
"Well, that sucks."
What was it with these kids and violence? Fighting is a last resort.
"Do you mean you got the rocks back for us?"
There was... I started, but Juno cut me off.
"What's on your shirt?"
I looked down as she came up to me and pulled at my shirt. Red drips of blood dotted a bit of my shirt, and looking past it, the drips also were on the top of my boot. Gross. How did I get dead guy blood on? Right, when I picked up the head. Real fresh. And that was never coming out of the white. Nope, I was just going to have to destroy it after this, along with my boots and everything else I was wearing, except for my cape. The cape can stay.
"This looks like..."
I quickly came up with an excuse before she could finish that sentence. "Paint, yeah. Got up to the cave and one of those two had been painting and some of it dripped on me. It's nothing."
"Oh, okay. So you got our rocks back."
Well, I'm glad that lie worked out. That wasn't something I felt like explaining. As I was saying, there was a... My tongue almost slipped out what had actually happened, and I cleared my throat. An incident. The rocks got buried in a cave-in. I'm sorry."
"Oh."
If that wasn't the most disappointed "oh" the world had ever witnessed, I didn't want to know who held that record.
"I'm happy you weren't buried in all that. Sucks that the minerals were, though."
Claudius started, grabbing the conversation and ripping apart the tone Juno had set.
"But you look pale. Also, you were about to say something earlier. Are you okay? Did something else happen at their base besides some paint falling onto your clothes?"
He put his hands down after doing quotations around his emphasized word, and I held back the urge to tell him, "Claudius, sometimes I really hated how smart you are." The look on his face told me he knew it wasn't paint. Unfortunately, telling a bunch of 6- and 7-year-olds about a murder was not on my list of things to do. Only that the cavern I was in almost collapsed on top of us, that's all.
"I see. So, no minerals, huh?"
Well, not the originals. Day and I figured that, while we couldn't replace the rocks, minerals, we could try and get you something similar. These were found on top of a mountain, barely peeking out of the snow. Who knows how long they've been up there? Could have been for tens of thousands of years. The disappointed looks turned to curious ones as I started pulling out rocks and handing them out. Tiny hands snatched them up before chatting excitedly about how they liked them and compared them to each other's rocks.
"These are so pretty!"
Lyric squeaked out a joyous giggle before hugging me, thankfully avoiding the blood.
"Thank you."
"Sorry I couldn't get the minerals back."
"It's okay. These ones are better."
"Are you sure? They aren't from anywhere too far." She nodded.
"They came from our great hero."
I gave out a bit of an awkward chuckle, as if they were still on that. Little did they know their great hero couldn't hold their stomach contents down when they picked up a severed head. Unless all heroes had issues and authors just wanted to glorify them. An issue for another time.
"Hey, look! Your dad's here, Aerrow!"
Gasper called out, pointing behind me, and started waving.
"Hello, Mr. King, sir!" "Knock it off, he can't hear you,"
Claudius growled.
"There's almost 1,000 people in here, all making noise." "But I wanted to say hello." "Don't start crying because you're not loud enough."
"But he's my other hero." "I'll see if my father has time to say hi after the trial," I somewhat muttered as I turned around from the sad child to see a green, red, and silver dragon, Archelaus. He was incredibly hard to miss, as he was 3 times the size of Day, taking up a good portion of the sky as he flew in with an entourage. Great, the council was here too. This was going to be fun. Wait, 1, 2, only 3 members and the general. Where were the other 2 councilmen? Didn't matter. The less council, the better. 2 out of 4 was more than enough, and with Owen there, it would make the experience all the better. He was technically part of the council, but I never associated him with the others. He was family. I saw him on top of Mistletoe, and like the man himself, Mistletoe stood out with his black and yellow scales that contrasted the rest of the party above. A team I had sorely missed. I hadn't seen them in a while. Father probably sent him on a mission I wasn't informed of, but he was back now, just in time to deal with a buried murder case. Damn, it was too bad that he couldn't see our trial. As someone who helped train me in the art of the sword and many other weapons while my father was busy, I missed my adoptive uncle. I turned back to the little entourage I had. I have to go see my father about something. I'll meet up with you guys later. Maybe try a game or 2.
"I have a few I want you to play,"
Kairos said scornfully, but didn't elaborate further as the other kids nodded, apparently knowing exactly what he was talking about. "All right, then I'll come find you at some point." Holly pouted.
"You're not coming today?"
"We'll see. If I can't, Day will let you know."
"Okay. Also, this rock is very pretty." "It's a mineral," Claudius sighed. "But yes, I concur, it's pretty. Now, you should go before the king starts this up." I curtly nodded, and jumped on Day as Gasper asked what concur meant. Waving goodbye, we left the kids with their rocky minerals and headed towards the booth. It took us a matter of seconds to make it to the royal booth, and a wave of an unwelcoming atmosphere came from 2 of the 4 people within it. Councilwoman Freya, leader of housing, energy, and labor divisions within the kingdom, had a nasty temper with 0 patience. She was also on the shorter side, and I was sure that her temper and shrinking were because of her age. No one would say it out loud, but her thin, white-gray hair and bony features under a warm dress and coat made it seem she was one gust away from the grave. But she was quite the opposite, and incredibly lively, to say the least, and loud. Not that I wanted ill wishes for her, but sometimes I wished her person was like the frame it was in, ready for retirement. In contrast to the woman who was always sneering when one of the royals weren't looking, Councilman Oliver, who was stuck up to everyone but his superiors in person, took part in his division of agriculture quite seriously and literally. Round and dressed in incredibly expensive clothing, he loved food. He was also a bit older and probably 1 cardiac arrest away from bouncing into a grave, but he wasn't too terrible of a person. To everyone that was on his level, at least. I wasn't, but that was okay because he lacked decent eating manners, whether or not it was because of his love of agriculture made him forget, or he just didn't know about rules and proper etiquette. I found him disgusting. Not to mention any sort of movement made him sweat profusely, but at least he kept his part of the kingdom running, right? Face value, the council wore masks when dealing with me, but I knew their hatred towards me was very real.
They talked a lot behind my back about it whenever I left their sight. Always something I was doing was wrong, even when I knew I was doing it right, which wasn't as often as I'd like. I wasn't great at courtly duties, but I did try. Still, their fake smiles pierced on, trying to swindle my favor whenever I was around. My sister and I discussed their feats when we've had long days and free time to vent. The only difference was they liked her, probably because she did her duties, and the duties I was terrible at when I was, well, being a bad prince and loafing around, which only made their pandering way worse for her. Honestly, I was almost glad I was hated by them. Compared to the lovely council, my father and General Owen greeted me with real smiles, and no scorn and scoff hidden behind the masks. The king, Solomon, was tall and rugged, taller than me by a little bit, and certainly steadier than I'd ever be. A neatly trimmed beard etched out his grandeur, the same color as the short hair on his head, burgundy, though it was graying slightly on the sides. I'd like to think I got some of my good looks from him, the knightly rustic parts at least. My softer features were not. Owen, on the other hand, was only a smidge shorter than I. Only recently, at least, had I outgrown him. Short, bedhead mess was crafted out of his dirt blonde hair that almost seemed like it was on purpose. Like father, his dark teal irises held wisdom. A 5 o'clock shadow complemented the scars of battle around his left eye from an Outland monster when he was younger. It was a miracle that he hadn't damaged his eye from the attack, but apparently served as a reminder to be aware of what he could have lost. It was also a solid reminder without my lessons that adventuring and the likes were not safe, no matter how much of a small bit of me wanted to be entertained. I banished that segment to the vault within the broken door. I didn't need that in my mind when I had other things to concern myself with. Both of them wore similar armor to my own. Owen, a little heavier, but sleeker as Seraphinian tech laced through it, a feat the king and I wouldn't dare attempt, with a color palette much darker than father's or mine, verses out of white and red with tints of silver once in a while. His was black and red, with hints of white and silver even more sparsely, with the red glowing slightly with power in the darkened booth. His breastplate matched my father's heavier set overcoat, while I preferred the lighter set, since I tended to move more and take blows less. Why was my father wearing armor? Who knew? He was the king, and wore what he wanted. Archelaus and Mistletoe seemed to have no opinion on my apparent arrival, more focused on food, along with the council's dragons, but at least they acknowledged my presence with a small nod or a wave of a tail. Unlike the others, it was fine. This was a normal, daily occurrence. I wasn't bitter. Before any of us could say anything, Oliver had to put in his ever-so-important compensation to start off, once again pandering with a happy tone.
"How honored we must be to be graced with your presence, Prince Aerrow. Must be of great importance for you to be here before the trial."
I lied when I said I was fine with their attitude. I felt my lack of patience for the man shatter, and Day silently telling me to ignore him. And I did. I did not want to deal with the two-faced, double-meaning facades. I felt myself give a small nod before turning to the general and king. "Can I speak with you two, preferably alone?"
"The council has the right to be in on this conversation,"
Oliver stated like a kind reminder to how ever so important the council was.
"Whatever it is, we are here to help."
"Oliver," my father calmly started, turning to the councillor, sensing the hint of sarcasm the man had accidentally let slip out. The king's tone might have been easygoing, but his demeanor told everyone present that he was not in the mood for their helpful nature. "The prince has asked for privacy."
"Apologies, sire. Prince Aerrow."
"Good. Now leave for the time being." The king turned away from the two council members who reluctantly left. They hated me. I knew this. and I didn't like them very much either. They were gross and sleazy. Why my father kept them as the council was beyond my understanding. Out of all four, at least the other two had shown to be somewhat competent, even if they argued with me about how things should be done. The king looked away from my face and down to my clothes. "You have blood on you. What did you do this time?" "It's not mine," I answered, half wishing he wouldn't just assume I had hurt myself. "Well, that's a relief, because I cannot postpone the trial if you had. It would be unfair to everyone else. With that said, whose is it?" "It's... something happened." "Are you feeling all right, Aerrow?" Owen asked, looking me over. "What happened?" "There..." My tongue caught as I tried to speak what we found. "Come on, you can. You know that little mountain range southwest of the city?" "You mean the one where your friends hang out?" I gave him a confused look, as I wasn't sure how he knew that, but I continued my story. "They aren't my friends, but yes, where those two hang out. Inside there was a weird cavern, and we found... there was a body." Both of them had a look of surprise as I continued. "The cavern was apparently new to Elias and Mychaila, and when they were showing us where they got these strange rocks, minerals, whatever, there was a corpse hanging from the ceiling upside down, decapitated and stripped of what clothing he may have had. The room was weird, like an altar or something, but I don't recall anything being up there. But this guy was definitely ritualistically killed for some reason." Day continued the story as I felt my stomach turn. "We're not sure who the man was, but he wasn't killed by the two boys. The corpse was quite fresh, within an hour of our arrival, as there was still some heat coming from it."
"So how did the blood end up on your shirt?"
Father asked emotionlessly, and I swallowed bile. "I noticed something in the dark corner of the room and picked it up. Turns out the head of the man had not gone far."
"Did you touch anything else at the crime scene?"
"No, sire." "You'll find that the two boys and Aerrow left behind something, though," Day commented, and I glared up at her. "Day, it's a perfectly natural reaction to throw up after finding a corpse. It was disgusting, and you did good for keeping it together until you had his face staring at you. Thanks for the reminder."
"Is this also your evidence to support that Elias and Mychaila had not committed the act?"
Owen asked, ending our banter, and we nodded. He turned to the king, a bit of disappointment. "I would have loved to stay, but duty calls. I'll get my two commanders, and we can investigate this farther. You'll have to fill me in later about how well he does." "About that," I started, grabbing his attention before he could leave. "There was an earthquake or something, and the tunnel and entrance collapsed not long after we found the body. I'm not sure how much is intact."
"An earthquake? There were no reports of an earthquake today."
Then what caused the mountain to shake, if not an earthquake? A chill went up my spine. This whole thing felt wrong. That doesn't make sense. The whole mountain shook.
The king grabbed the conversation again. "You mentioned there being an altar. Could you describe it?"
There was a perfectly crafted circle carved into the ground. 6 stones were supposed to sit in little formations placed around the circle equally, and there were drawings with weird text on the walls. I know I recognized the text, but I have no idea what it was. There was also dried blood underneath the new, wet blood. Someone had been killed there before today."
"Stones. What did the stones look like?"
The kids had them before, so there was a deduction that each stone was from a different kingdom, but they all had the same yellow streak across them. I had never seen 5 of the stones anywhere in Absalom, but as pretty as they were, they felt like they had some sort of magic to them, not a healthy kind either.
"It's nice to know you can still sense magic," Father muttered in thought before turning to his best friend. "You haven't come across an altar like this, have you?
No, and I'm not overly thrilled about how old it sounds.
My thoughts exactly. I'll save your knights the trouble, and look for what the altar might be from by using records in the library myself.
Thank you, Solomon. Please, excuse me. I have a body and a head to recover.
Be careful.
Of course, and Aerrow. I looked at him in confusion. Yeah? Good luck. We had fun creating the trial. Fair warning. An uncomfortable thanks came out of my mouth, and he left. Oh, lovely. My father and his general created it this year. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. They had an Outland monster somewhere for sure. Great. I mean, they usually did, but those two took it upon themselves to create it. And not the usual coordinator, meaning the monster, or monsters, were not going to be fun. The armor now made sense. I turned to the king, who seemed to be deep in thought. I knew they both meant well, but they also knew how I felt about the creatures that wanted in our walls, and they just had to bring one in. Probably one that was mean and nasty, and maybe requiring my father to deal with it if I couldn't. It would have been disgraceful of me if I couldn't. Chapter 4. Trial Buddies. Day and I left before the 2 council members could file back in, and headed to the starting positions along with the incredibly few trial runners. In past years, they had been up to 100. This year, there was 1/10 of that. But that was probably because of the sense of peace that the kingdom had been in, and the lack of Outland monsters. Perhaps not the lack thereof, but they had been getting decreasingly less aggressive, even before I was born, with the random surge when Atlamilia and I had been born, but that wasn't unusual. I had been told that even since the king had been on the throne, they had started to attack less frequently. Despite the lack of participants, I knew none of them from the capital, except for Elias and Mazea, who arrived later than I, unfortunately. I took out my armored, short-sleeved long coat from Day's bag and started to put it on after removing my pauldron and sword belt, like I was going to do any fighting with whatever those 2 managed to drag in with just casual wear. The metal plates clicked into place as I closed the jacket, hiding away the specks of blood. Hopefully Owen could get a team to deal with the murder and come back before the trial ended. It was for them just as much as it was for me, not because I needed to succeed for the crown, but to prove that their efforts were not put to waste and I had grown. Father's voice came through the arena with some sort of magic for an introduction that I've both heard 1,000,000 times and never absorbed any of it. I quickly readjusted my cape and gear.
"Your sister isn't here,"
Day muttered, and I instinctively looked up to the booth.
"Think she'll arrive late."
When has Atlamilia ever arrived late? If she was coming, she would have been here by now. I sighed. She obviously has something else to do.
Along with the 2 other council members, perhaps.
Who knows? Whatever the reasoning, she's going to hate not being here. She seemed to enjoy the trials.
You don't seem as heartbroken as I would have imagined.
No, as I said, she's probably just busy with something. This isn't as important to her as it is to me, to us. But I won't hold it against her. I actually look forward to seeing hers next year.
What a kind big brother you are.
Yes, I wasn't looking forward to using her mistakes in the trial as fuel to tease her afterwards in any way.
You're so cruel. She can't do that to you if she isn't here.
Exactly. My father registered in my ears.
The Dragon Knights will introduce the mission to the trial runners as their location arrives. Once the mission is given, it must be completed to the best of their ability. Failure and success will be judged by individual assessment and group assessment.
So not that entirely different from other years. No race this year, unfortunately. Made sense, though. Day was incredibly quick. Faster than... A little purple scrying orb dropped down in front of me, just off to the side, interrupting my thoughts. It floated silently, as it kept itself airborne and steady. I smiled slightly. Maybe it was for the best that there wasn't a race. The orb would have never been able to keep up with Day. Movement came from above me in my peripheral vision, and I turned to it to see myself projected high above the stadium floor, looking up. Dust was placed heavily from the collapsed rock from before in some areas of my hair, and I sighed. My hair was never the best to begin with, doing what it wanted with its thickness, and how Atlamelia tamed her own locks was a straight-up miracle, but now it was decorated from my adventure earlier. Great. Better than blood, but... Day moved her wing and started nudging my head, somehow ruffling out the dirt and dust. I attempted to push her wing away, to no avail. "Stop that. It must be cleansed." "All right, I got it, just..." Some laughing caught my attention, and I sighed again as the visual switched to one of the other trial members. Thanks, Day, for embarrassing me. "No, they find you adorable for having someone like me doting you." "Because I'm an adult, needs to be doted on?" "I'll dote and coddle you until the day one of us dies." She left me to brush out the rest of the dirt and dust on my own, as I went back to look ahead at the sand. It wasn't the first year that they were using the little things to show off the participants on a larger screen. The labyrinth made it difficult for anyone to watch unless they were in there, and sometimes the trials took place out of the stadium, so the orb was useful. But having it right there made me self-conscious, and at times the orbs, unfortunately, made the trial become more of a source of entertainment instead of its original purpose to find valuable people to protect the kingdom from Outland Monsters, and thus made the trials become increasingly more dangerous. Fun if someone was into hacking up monsters or just showing off, but dangerous.
"Commanders, if you would..."
My father's voice rang, and 3 dragons descended from the sky. The orb seemed to get incredibly excited as it started to dance around, and Day went to poke it with a claw, only for it to dash away. "Look at this thing go." "You're enjoying the scrying orb, huh?" "Yes, I want to play with it." Day's thoughts came through my head, and I noticed she really wanted to bat it away. "Day, no, you can't play with it." "I could fly up and spin around it, and it's just so cute." Cute was not what I would have called it, but I didn't spoil it for her. "You can after the trial, probably." "You think so? I've never seen myself fly from someone else's view. Never even tried it with you." "Well, now we have to see about using it." "I bet I look amazing." "I might be a bit biased, but yes, you do." The 3 dragons landed in front of us on the platform as the arena floor started to open up. Their dragon knights sat on their backs, all decorated in armor that was like Owen's with Seraphinian tech woven through it, glowing ever so slightly, and magic inhibitors to fight against my family's existence. I had to admit, having 3 commanders in front of me made them visually appealing and intimidating. It wasn't often I saw completely armored knights, since the castle and city didn't have the threats that lay outside the walls. It was one of the original reasons why I wanted to be a dragon knight back in the day. Then I found out that my family made Seraphinian tech malfunction in our presence, and therefore, in my best health and interest, had to avoid the cool additions, such as communications and impact absorption, that the armor could provide. They had yet to make a magic inhibitor that worked without hindering the armor itself in our constant presence, without it breaking or not working altogether. Not that I didn't like my armor, but it was definitely plain and almost primitive in comparison. Commander Toll decided to tell us what we had to do next.
This trial is simple in theory.
Translation: if death was possible, we were going to die.
Teams have been created, 2 groups of 3 and a group of 4. Each one of us will deliver your team to the trial, while your dragons will be waiting on the other end.
This was new. Usually, teamwork meant including the dragons. What the?
It's a rescue mission, and we will rescue you if it comes down to it.
And if you need rescuing?
One of the trial runners slyly asked. A frown formed on the knight's face, apparently not in the mood for a cheeky jab.
Then you're failing miserably at the trial if a commander somehow gets overrun to the point of requiring assistance. Oh, and you fail on the spot.
Say what?
On top of your rescue mission, your job is to escort us to the end. For a perfect score, we don't even have to draw our weapons.
Great. Running through a maze, battles were inevitable. I wasn't going to have Day as my backup. And, to add the icing, it was an escort mission. The only thing that could make this worse was...
Prince Aerrow, you'll be with Commander Emmett, Mychaila, and Elias.
I think my father hates me. I believe he's testing you. That wasn't a disagreement. I believe you'll do just fine. I'm not saying I won't. I looked over at my 2 partners in this excursion. They, on the other hand, I don't think they know what an Outland monster even looks like. She gave out a small agreement, and I left her. Getting off her back and joining Commander Emmett next to his dragon, I noticed his armor powered down almost immediately, and a small sorry escaped my lips. At least even without the technology, the armor still functioned as such. I also knew the commander was a great knight, to the point where stories had circulated that he never needed armor to begin with. He just wore it for the sake of keeping his allies from worrying about him. Made sense on why Emmett was picked to be the judge over my trial, instead of Commander Toll or Commander Clark. Not that they weren't great knights themselves, they just relied on the gear more than Emmett. Day and the other trial runners' dragons left the starting area to some unknown destination, and I held back a sigh that would have expressed how much I was missing her already. Elias and Mychaila joined me as Emmett dropped down from his dragon, but remained silent on what to do next. I left the outside world for contemplation. Why couldn't we fight together like we had planned? My question wasn't answered, as a large structure came up from behind the commanders, grabbing my attention. I wandered over to the edge to see it. A dark cube rose from the hole in the arena, and it seemed larger than what I had remembered it to be from the booth. Much, much larger. The walls and layout of the labyrinth stayed the same, walls moving to change the structure and paths of the inside as time passed, multiple floors, but the halls were a lot slimmer, even if they were still towering in some areas or large rooms in others, each floor being about 2 stories in height. At least, that's what it seemed to be until the exterior walls clouded up to a solid black cube, hiding any glimpse of what could be inside. Not that I couldn't take a guess. The knight and general basically spelt it out, without having to reference past years. The structure kept rising, and before I knew it, easily 7 levels could be present. A rectangular prism where a cube used to be. It glared down at all who opposed it. They changed it from years before. Why did it have to be so much more complicated now? It was already messed up. In fact, how was this ever practical before? Why would someone go out of their way to make this? Unless the maze was just a metaphor to the unknown or caves. Still impractical. I was hoping that we weren't going to do the ever-changing labyrinth of hell, but, of course, why would the king want to make this fun for me? That would be a correct assumption, and knowing your father, he probably wanted to put you out of your element as much as possible. Day commented, apparently listening in on my thoughts. There are better ways of doing that, like asking me to make a foreign dish. That would be interesting, since I don't think you've ever cooked before. This is... Are you eating something? Yes. I'm stuck with a couple of bimbos on the most ludicrous trial ever, and you were just eating whatever snack you decided to bring along? I would have offered, but you're there, and I'm here, hungry. Must be nice to be so relaxed. It's quite lovely. I honestly thought I would have to do a lot of work today, but no, this is all you. She stated, way too happily for my taste. Remind me to thank the king later. Oh, I'll remind you all right, I growled, as Emmett led the way to the entrance. The black cube-like shape was even larger off the platform and right next to it, as I had to look all the way up to attempt to see its top. It had to be easily 50 meters high, twice the size as before. I looked back to the entrance. What was hiding in there if someone had to alter it? Elias bumped into my shoulder, almost knocking me off my feet as he walked by.
Stop daydreaming and hurry up. I don't want to be your buddy any more than you do.
Glad the feeling is mutual, I replied as I caught up with the others. But you shouldn't just head in there without analyzing.
It's a giant black box with walls and monsters inside. Not much to think about.
For now.
Considering what you did earlier, I don't think you get the right to lecture me about being careful.
I rolled my eyes and we walked inside. Commander Emmett and a couple of little orbs followed behind us. I looked around to find the first room to be rather empty. The floor was sandy, with debris of random pieces of foliage scattered about. Walls were black stone, and there were 2 options for progression, forward or to the right. So much for maze rules. Go left, Mychaila sighed. Doesn't look like we can use the simple right-hand maze rule either, I added. The walls look like they move at random, which becomes a problem if this is a perfect maze. A perfect maze? A maze with only one solution, which, in this monstrosity, could change.
Your father wouldn't be so cruel to do that to his son, would he?
Elias asked, and I looked at him dead in the eyes. He stuck me with you 2.
Son of a... Then how about we just go straight?
I also vote for straight, Mychaila agreed, and I just shrugged. It didn't matter, really. I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. The door behind us suddenly slammed shut, leaving us in complete darkness and scaring us half to death. Elias screamed. Could you save the screaming for when you are actually being attacked? I asked, as I attempted to see anything, really. It makes it incredibly difficult to decide if you need help.
I won't scream when I need help because I won't need help.
I shook my head. He was going to need so much help. Does anyone have a light? It doesn't look like this place comes installed with them, Mychaila asked, and silence was all that replied. Okay, communication through words. I can't see shit, let alone someone shaking or nodding their heads.
Prince has a fire dragon. I'm sure he can make a little light or something,
Elias suggested, and I sighed. Why was that always the first solution? Have a problem? Use magic. I hated magic. I can't do magic.
Well, aren't you the most useless Absalomian ever?
I can't use it because magic draws in Outland Monsters, I growled, as I somewhat adjusted to the darkness. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the entire truth for my answer. There should have been a way to make some sort of light around here. It's bad enough I'm here. Adding magic is just ringing a bell to us.
Are you serious?
No, I'm kidding.
How do you know so much about Outland Monsters?
Experience. I didn't want to discuss it, and found what I was looking for. I picked up a large piece of wood and handed it off to an outline of one of the boys. Elias grunted.
What the hell was that for?
Shut up and hold it out to a wall. He mimicked what I said in a mocking manner, but obliged, and I heard it hit the stone wall.
I took out my blade and scraped it against the wall, causing sparks to fly. The incredibly dry wood caught fire surprisingly easily and lit up the room to show more pieces of wood, and the 3 others, along with the 3 orbs that kept out of the way of Elias waving the torch around slightly. I turned away from the magic balls. There, light. Since we don't have anything to stop the wood from being consumed, we should gather some of this and use it when the torch starts to go out.
All right, but who's going to hold it? We can't fight and hold wood at the same time.
I turned to the commander. You've got nothing better to do, right? Emmett seemed like he was trying to think of a way to get out of my proposal before sighing in defeat.
No, Your Highness.
Excellent. Let's get you loaded up.
Only you would make the escort work, my lord.
Nonsense. Have you met my sister? She would have left you without anything to do at all, and that is just boring.
Yes, so boring. Athnaraka forbid.
We wandered in the darkness for a good while. Walls shifted, and sounds of growls came from the abyss, but that was it. The maze was empty besides us, and it had me incredibly anxious. Not that I was showing it. Hiding my emotions was practically lesson 1 of being a prince. Mychaila and Elias didn't seem like they were overly anxious like I was, as they seemed too busy chatting. But I quickly began to realize that the chit-chat was the rambles of frightened children trying to fill the void. It both was nice to listen to because it was doing its job surprisingly well, but it also blocked any noises that could indicate something was nearby. The commander was just as silent as I was, which made me think I was doing something right. Unfortunately, that also meant that the 2 chatterboxes were going to make us lose any sneaking advantage. But they did make the perfect bait. No, bad. Elias and Mychaila were my teammates for right now.
But if they were accidentally eaten, they wouldn't be much of a problem for you anymore.
Day, that kills people.
I know.
I think I would lose the trial if they were killed.
Yes, but silver lining, they won't bother anyone, ever, again.
Sorry, Day, but leaving people to accidentally be eaten, even these 2, is bad.
You are too precious for this world. I'm going to take you away someplace just as precious as you.
Anywhere with you is someplace precious.
Ah, flattering. What do you want?
Nothing. Just thinking about death. Commander Emmett is nervous.
We can discuss that later. What do you really want?
Could you think of some ideas to get back at Father for this miserable experience? The escort mission, fine. Extra death monsters, all good. Putting me with these 2, that's just crossing the line.
Well, since I truly have nothing better to do, I suppose I could create some ideas.
Much appreciated.
So, the commander?
She went silent as she heard what I heard, a low growl in the dark. We were no longer alone. Unfortunately, Elias and Mychaila didn't notice. You need to stop talking. I started off somewhat quietly, only to be cut off by Mychaila.
Don't interrupt. There is something else here.
They went silent, and the growling that I had heard before followed suit. I searched the darkness ahead of us, before looking around, trying to see if there was an outcrop within the walls where a monster could use to hunt from above.
I don't hear anything,
Elias whispered.
Maybe you were...
I wasn't. Now shut up, or you can be bait. I whispered back sharply, and his mouth closed. That silenced the 2 of them, and the growling came back in front of us, and just out of the torch's light. There was no way to tell how big it was, due to the nature of the maze, which was just great. I felt my heart beat hard in my chest, as I tried to see what was there. I could do this. I wasn't 5 anymore. I had years of practice. Silence greeted us once more, and I gripped my blade tightly. Just come out already. The sound of sand flinging against the wall reached my ears, and I pulled out my sword, pushing Mychaila out of the way, into Elias, as I moved in front of them. Time seemed to slow, as claws glinted in the torch's light. They came flying forwards, where they had been standing, where I stood waiting. The claws belonged to a large yellow and black spotted cat, as it attempted to land on me, as the boys yelled a bunch of jumbled words in surprise. I parried the monster away into the wall and readjusted my blade. It recovered incredibly quickly, shaking out sand from its large, brown owl wings. It growled, flicking its tail upwards slightly, showing white fur. We stared each other down, as I tried to figure out what I was doing. It had been years since I had seen a monster this close. Even if it was different, its soulless eyes still wanted to kill me, to kill all of us. But I didn't know what to expect from it. Outland monsters were complicated, usually combinations of normal light creatures but with twists like magic, or whatever this short-legged large cat was with the ability of flight. What was it capable of? Outland monsters didn't have the ability to create complex strategies or plans, at least most of them. They just attack relentlessly, but yet this one continued to stare, begging me to attack first.
Well, that was unexpected.
Elias chuckled nervously, drawing part of my attention to him, and the monster flicked its tail again.
Didn't think I would say this, but thanks for the save.
I kept my acknowledgement short. Sure.
Kind of pretty, if I'm honest. I thought Outland monsters were scary or something.
I was right on them never seeing a monster until today. Just another flick. Same motion. It wasn't a coincidence. You guys take this one.
What are you talking?
He didn't get to finish, as I turned to the darkness and rushed in slightly. A second monster had barely left the ground, and I shoved my pauldron squarely into its chest and throat. It was knocked out of the air, and I stabbed it through its head. It turned to ashes, leaving my sword embedded into the sand. I removed it and looked behind me to see that Mychaila had got behind the first monster, while Elias had its attention. Mychaila's sword went through its hind legs, just as it seemed ready to pounce, causing it to fall backwards. Elias cut the creature's head off, and it turned to ash. I looked towards the commander to see if he was fine, and if a third monster had appeared from behind. No monster had, and Emmett still held onto the torch and firewood, but he had kept far out of the way and against the far wall, like a good client. Elias turned to me, drawing in my attention.
How'd you know there was a second one?
Its tail. It kept making the same motion. I doubt there are only 2 of those kinds in here, I stated, and turned to the abyss to investigate it without moving, wondering what horrible dreaded thing awaited within it. We're being hunted.
Could you say that any more dramatically? Of course we're being hunted.
I don't think you quite understand the situation here. Those 2 were hunting together. So? I took a breather before I could accidentally lose my temper with him. That means that they are capable of strategizing. These aren't the casual, pesky Outland monsters. Normal ones don't strategize. They only know how to attack.
Or maybe that was all of them.
Maybe, but I highly doubt it.
Prince, you seem scared. Are you scared?
No. That was a lie. Just not overly interested in losing this trial because of a couple of bumbling children, or worse. That wasn't a lie. These 2 idiots had no idea what Outland monsters were capable of. The walls around the kingdom were there for a reason. Elias and Mychaila looked offended and ready to defend themselves when a shriek filled the space.
Fine. Made a minor mistake.
Mychaila started, surprisingly maturely.
Obviously you know a bit more than what some training can teach. What's the best course of action to take?
Well, just drop the leadership on my head. I was not expecting anything like this today. First a body, then the trial oddity, and now these two, the most annoying people in the kingdom besides the council, were asking for my help of all people. I may have been a prince, but I certainly hadn't led anything in my life. Day was silent on the matter, and a wall moved from where we had come from, blocking any way back. How fitting. From my own experience. I started careful to avoid bringing back vaulted-up memories. They are drawn to magic and dragon blood. Since we are probably on a separate section compared to the other teams, at least for now, any monster in our segment will come and just hunt us down, strategically or not. That's still up in the air, as you said, Elias. So with that in mind, we should keep as quiet as possible so we can hear them before they hear us.
And what about the torch? Elias questioned. Should we put that out? Outland monsters like the dark, after all.
We can't see without it, so if there are any monsters drawn to it, there is nothing that we can really do to stop that from happening, other than defending ourselves. A shriek filled the silence, a lot closer than it had been before, and much, much louder. It was fine. I didn't want my eardrums working when I was old anyway. Mychaila adjusted his shirt. Have any tips you want to add to dealing with them? I have one. Don't miss. Elias rolled his eyes.
Well, isn't that helpful? Prince Obvious over here.
What did you expect? Each one of these things are different types and classes. Just pay attention and adapt. There, 2 more lines of wisdom for you. Satisfied?
Yes, those last 2 were actually useful.
Great. Now let's get going. I led the way through the maze, though I wasn't entirely sure which way to go. Given a set purpose, even if it was just being leader of the party, suddenly made my thoughts a lot clearer. Even if there was a heavier weight thrown on my shoulders, I was less anxious about being in a dark maze full of monsters, whether it was because now I wasn't going through the trial with 2 idiots, but 2 members that were on the same page as me, or if the first encounter with those Outland monsters were not as bad as I thought it was going to be, or both. Either way, something calmed me down. The sense of ease from being less anxious made me notice things I hadn't noticed before, and I found that day seemed a lot closer. The sensory made me stop from making certain turns and going randomly through tunnels, but made me make calculated decisions on navigating, such as going up instead of down and vice versa. Now, as great as my navigating was to me, it certainly didn't avoid monsters, which we fought swiftly without injury. Nor did it help when I got ahead of the light in one instance, and the navigation introduced the wall to my face. The wall moved a moment afterwards, but the act had been committed, and it took a while to shut Elias and Mychaila up over it. The commander said nothing, but it was plain as day that he was never going to forget my fantastic feat of walking straight into a wall, which meant that if the council was watching, they weren't going to either. Wounded ego and face aside, a staircase was what was presented to us. An obstacle that I wasn't sure was one at all, as it led downwards with a dim light at the bottom. I was hesitant to go ahead, as it seemed too easy and too free to be harmless. Had we made it to the end, or was there another trial awaiting us in the light?
Last one down has to buy a round of victory drinks,
Elias shouted as he bolted ahead and down the stairs. Mychaila followed, but I hesitated once more. Wait, there might be.
Looks like Prince is buying. Imported it is.
We don't even like each other, I grumbled with a sigh, turning to Emmett, who was itching to go. You can go first. Might as well buy everyone in the party a drink. I'm sure you'd want one after this hell.
I wouldn't be opposed to it, Prince Aerrow.
I didn't say anything as he went ahead. We got to the bottom of the outrageously long staircase in good time, only to come to a sharp halt where the 2 boys seemed frozen in their tracks at the bottom. A large open space was presented. Dim lights lit up the area, highlighting a grassy field, much different from the sands and debris from above. Something the matter? I asked, as Mychaila looked at me, horrified.
There's something in the grass.
I warned you.
It's a bunny, and...
He couldn't seem to finish. I walked past them slightly. What was so scary about a bunny? Even if it was an Outland monster, it couldn't be that awful. Bunnies were cute. Something white and fluffy, about the size of a pillow, caught my attention as its little cotton tail wiggled. Guys, it's just a cute, soft, oversized... My voice stopped as it turned its face at me. Where its little mouth should have been, spider legs that acted like mandibles moving back and forth as it shoved something bloody into its fanged jaws. Large, black, soulless eyes stared directly at us, unwavering. That's not a cute bunny.
No, it's not.
Maybe next time start with the spider legs instead of, it's a bunny. That part is a little more important.
Whatever, how do we...
Mychaila didn't finish his question as the whole ground shook violently, and a screech like a siren mixed with a waterfall echoed through the walls of the cube. Then it went very quiet for a moment, as everything, including the monster in front of us, hesitated to move.
What the fuck was that?
I remained speechless, as I had no answer. I've never heard anything like it before. Whatever it was cried again, allowing me to pinpoint that whatever was making that noise was outside of the cube. Suddenly the monster in front of us screamed angrily and bounded toward us. You need to get out of there. There's something going on outside, Day stated, as I tried to figure out the best way to deal with the oversized rabbit. Kinda busy here. I know, just hurry up. I don't like this feeling I have.
Hey, Commander,
Elias called, and the four of us moved out of the path of the monster.
Tatian says there's something happening outside.
It's nothing for you to be concerned with, the commander stated a little more calmly than I was comfortable with, a forced calmness. Focus on the task at hand. The rabbit jumped at my throat, and I slashed my blade at it. It screamed as the blade drew across its face, but it rebounded again directly into my chest, knocking me off my feet. My hand went for its throat as it started for my face with its spider legs only a few centimeters away, spraying saliva. A sword went through it, barely missing my head, and the rabbit stopped moving, dropping all of its weight on me before turning to dust. I looked up past it to see Elias removing his sword. I stood up, wiping my face and armor off the ashen particles. Thanks, but a little close, don't you think?
It's a good thing I didn't miss, eh?
He stretched.
But that wasn't so bad. One tiny mutant rabbit.
About that.
Mychaila started to my left, and I looked over to see that he was pointing at the grass.
There's 5 more that just showed up out of the ground.
Of course there was. Why would Father and Owen make this ending part remotely simple? The ground shook again, knocking us off our feet, ending my internal complaining. What was causing that? Chapter 5. Complications. I didn't get a chance to pick myself up off the floor as an explosion came from above. I looked up and saw pieces of the cube starting to rain down. My feet quickly got me to a stand and started to move me out of the way, only to notice that Elias was frozen in place, looking upwards. I didn't bother to ask what the hell he was looking at, as a shadow from a large piece of rubble grew and tackled him out of the way. The piece crash-landed, sending up dust as I stood up again. Are you trying to be crushed? He didn't say anything as he just stared at something behind me, terrified. I turned around and saw a grotesque, grey, stone-like, 2-legged bat creature with spikes on its arms and tails. Another Outland monster. It attacked, raining spikes down at us, and I rolled out of the way after making sure Elias was moving first. The creature wasn't like anything we had faced so far. I turned to the commander who had dropped his wood and started towards me. I turned back to Elias. I'll take care of this one. Go help Mychaila with the rabbits.
As you command, Prince.
Of course, he'd listen when it got him out of danger. I turned to the monster and defended Elias's escape to the other side of the field. This trial was over. The creature didn't like my position and sent more spikes out. I deflected some of them away while moving back out of the others. The creature's spikes grew back rapidly, forcing me to keep my distance. Day, where are you?
Below. We're on our way up,
she replied calmly, though I felt her concern over my well-being grow every second.
Whoever built this magic maze did a fantastic job of not making it easy for us to leave.
Probably because they didn't think it would turn out like this. There was a small agreement from her as I decided against my better judgment and jumped up to the monster. I didn't give it a moment to think of what I was doing as I rammed my pauldron into its chest, sending it off its rubble pedestal. It landed on its back like it had forgotten how to fly, and I jumped down after it, stabbing it in the skull. Its tail smacked me off it, making me lose my sword as I lost my grip, and I landed hard in the grass. It stood up, removing the blade before throwing it away. It growled at me in what I guessed was annoyance. That was new, sort of, maybe? I had no idea. It was awful, and that's all I cared to focus on other than avoiding its spikes and it. The creature flew up, and I took the chance to go after my sword. Spikes rained down just in front of me, forcing me to skid to a stop to avoid being impaled. I looked up just in time to somewhat brace against its attack as the monster tackled me into the wall of the room. My breath was knocked out of me from the impact as it pinned my shoulders against the wall. I didn't get a chance to recover when the fanged creature lunged at my throat. Commander Emmett shouted out a war cry, distracting it from completing its attack immediately, and unlocked its grip on me as he charged into it. I dropped down, causing it to let me go entirely, and it hit the wall, where I would have been. I swiped my leg out, kicking out its legs, and it tripped off to the side, allowing me to leave. I dove for my sword and rolled to a stand facing the monster. Emmett stood on its other side, having it pincered between us. I took a breather. What was with monsters and trying to attack my throat today? I had other body parts they could maim. No answer was given, not that I expected one, as a second one of the stone bat monsters appeared from the sky, forcing Emmett away. The original monster hissed at me before charging on 4 limbs as the leg I hit was bent in an odd angle. I gave it my full attention and met it halfway and dropped my sword on its neck as it went to leap at me. It burst to ash, and I released the breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. Outland monsters apparently needed heads even when stabbing them in the face didn't work the first time. The commander shoved a large axe through his monster, cleaving it in two like it was cake, and the monster turned to ash. The process of it was mesmerizing. I had been trained to use all sorts of weapons, but an axe at that size? I didn't think I'd ever attempt the feat. The commander took notice of me staring and walked over to me.
"Are you all right, my lord?"
"Yes, I'm fine, thank you." The commander gave a minor sigh of relief before tapping on his gauntlet. A screen of light flipped upwards, flickered on for a moment, sending messages across it faster than I could read upside down, before stuttering in and out. He smacked it slightly, and it turned back on. He started tapping buttons on the screen, only for the screen to flash red, and he repeated the button pressing again. I took a step closer, which was a mistake. The screen turned back off entirely, and didn't hide back within his armor. He looked up at me with concern, before closing the screen manually. "Commander, what is happening outside?" I asked, with a surprising amount of calmness to my voice.
"Nothing pleasant, Prince Aerrow. From the last notification, Outland Monsters appeared just outside the capital and are attacking the arena."
My heart skipped a beat. How did they get in? From where? He only shook his head.
"I don't know."
"The trial should have been stopped once the first Outland monster appeared."
"Yes, and I've been trying to end it by activating the failsafe so I can escort you to safety, but it's not working. The only thing it did was open the dragon's den."
"What of the king?"
"Fighting, trying to help people evacuate, but hasn't been left alone long enough to end the trial."
What about the emergency control? There should be 3 emergency control... Dead or missing. The only way it seems we are going to get out of here is if we complete the trial. Hopefully. All right. At least it was a start. The king could take care of himself. Since Aunt Lamilia probably hadn't come, I didn't need to worry about her being caught up in the mess. Then again, I didn't know where she was, or where the monsters... No, stop it. She could take care of herself. Have you heard from the other commanders in the trial?
I was trying to contact them after Fernand explained what the shaking was, but the magic being blasted everywhere, and you...
The frustration was clear as day, but he refused to speak of it as freely as he probably would have liked. It was clear who were to blame over his communications not working, and unfortunately, speaking ill of them was not something he was allowed to do.
It's fucking broken, and the upgrades from Serafina to better tolerate higher magical interference hasn't arrived yet. Even if it starts working again, I doubt it will stay working long enough to contact someone and have them respond. We're completely cut off, and there aren't any safe places in here if we are trapped.
I apologize for the king and I interfering with your duty. I told him sincerely as I processed the information he had given. What of the dragons? Can't they reach this place?
No, and that busted hole in the ceiling means that more monsters are going to fill in here.
Can't the dragons use that hole?
They would be trapped in here, and the maze this year wasn't designed for dragons. They wouldn't be able to move around in here well, let alone 4 of them. There is a barrier that keeps things from getting out, so them coming in would be a terrible idea.
To keep monsters inside if one of us, or it decided to break the wall of the maze, on purpose or not. Can we get to the other teams from here in case we can't leave? We could group up and have a better chance. The commander shook his head, ending my optimistic ideas, and I sighed. There was no way to make sure that the other trial runners were all right, let alone knowing what was happening outside. Emmett was very correct. We were completely cut off. So don't come and rescue you, Day clarified, and I answered with a simple yes. What would you like me to do then? Help others evacuate, kill monsters. Your flames should take care of them with no problems. Just stay out of too much trouble. What about the king? He'll be fine. He has Archelaus, his guard. Just help as many people as possible. I'll call you if I get out of here. All right, keep out of trouble. I can't protect you with my fire, and I don't want to die today. I'll be fine. But how can you be sure? You don't use magic. All you have are those 2, the commander and your sword. If you worry about me, you'll only get yourself hurt, I told her. I'll be fine. I know this is going to sound awful to you, but perhaps using magic will. I'm not using it. She went to argue with me as I got distracted by Mychaila, who shouted my name. I looked up just in time to see an evil rabbit coming down on my head. I slashed it in half and turned back to my conversation as the creature turned to dust. Aerrow, use magic if you have to. I'll be fine with what I have. Just please hurry with helping out there, so there isn't a chance that I have to resort to using it. I'll do my best. And if we manage to get out of this alive, maybe we'll go do something fun before we start our Dragon Knight missions. I want to go fishing then. To the west, though, so it will be a several-day thing. Fishing in the west it is. I wonder what fish they have in the Vasconatic Ocean. Her thoughts trailed off, and I left her to her task, while I focused on mine and turned to the commander. I'll keep as far as I can from you in hopes that your gear starts working. Maybe get in contact with the others.
What about the monsters?
He asked, looking towards where Elias and Mychaila were still fighting 3 rabbits.
There will be more than just them if the trial doesn't end on its own.
I wanted to say that we would cross that bridge when we got there, but I hesitated on my answer. While I was content on just adapting to each situation, it wasn't just me. He was looking for an order, and I had to provide. If your communications device doesn't start working again, we'll head back into the maze, the stairwell specifically if necessary. While it's open in here, bright even, it would be easier to funnel any monsters that make their way in here. The larger ones would be stuck to being in this room, and there would only be 2 ways for smaller monsters to come. We can conserve our energy on taking turns on watch, and I'm sure all of us has some sort of water on them if we absolutely need it. I doubt we'll be in here longer than a day if it's that extreme out there.
Right.
The knight relaxed, now that he had a set destination, as he pulled off his gauntlet, forcing the screen back out again.
I'll get to work on this and keep watch of any other unexpected guests. I'm not supposed to help you deal with your rabbit troubles, but after they are dealt with, I'm free to protect you once more, Prince Aerrow.
I forgot that we were technically being tested still. How annoying. I'll be over there, fighting rabbits and away from the gear.
Good luck. They die pretty easily, but you'll have to actually hit them, which is difficult when they are grouped together. Heftveres-classed monsters are when things start to get interesting.
Thanks for the tip. I left the commander and ran over to the 2 boys who were standing back to back as the 3 monsters had surrounded them. I reached the 2 as the monsters jumped. Mychaila noticed my approach and took the monster that was jumping away from me while I defended against his open flank. The rabbit bit into my sword and wouldn't let go, forcing me to kick it off. It squeaked before squeaking again as it landed with a thud, making me feel bad for it for a moment. The feelings went away as it got up and hissed at me, reminding me that it was a soulless creature with the sole purpose to kill everything that wasn't it. More of its kind were attacking my people outside, possibly even killing them. I couldn't let my personal feelings of it seemingly being cute get in the way of killing the squeaker in front of me. It was this monster, or our escape, and we had to get out of here so I could defend my people. The rabbit charged at me, and I went at it. It pounced, and I sidestepped it, slicing it as it went by, and it burst into ash. It was quick, but not overly unpredictable. I turned and helped finish off the last 2 rabbits that were giving a tired Elias and Mychaila a problem. The last one was knocked to the floor, and my sword went through its head. It struggled for a moment before disappearing, and I removed my sword from the ground.
"Took you long enough to come and help us,"
Elias exclaimed in anger.
"What were you doing?"
"Getting information on what was happening outside and creating a plan in case this happened," I replied coolly, understanding why he was pissed off. Those rabbits were supposed to end the trial, but we're still stuck in here. He looked around and confirmed that there was no exit out.
"We're stuck in here? Why?"
"Because something went amiss, and outside is a bit of a mess right now. I'm sure your dragons have notified you on how."
"So there is actually a raid going on out there? Like, that's for real?"
Mychaila asked, and it dawned on me that they hadn't accepted the reality of the situation.
Why are they attacking?"
"There are a lot of—"
"No, why are they attacking?"
He growled in anger.
"There is a wall, guards. They can't just come in here and have no one notice."
"These things do happen, which is why we have knights to defend. You know, the thing you are doing this trial for?"
"I don't think there'd be the possibility of raids. I just like the idea of how much it paid, and Elias only joined because his parents are forcing him."
"Those were some fair reasons. Well, not so much the parents forcing their kid into something they didn't want to do for their own benefit, but it explained why they signed up for the trial to begin with. So what do you plan on doing then, knowing the reality of what a dragon knight does?"
"My parents probably thought that since the kingdom has been at peace for so long, the possibility of even fighting, besides in the trial, was very little," Elias started. "But if creatures like whatever the fuck that was earlier are out there, I don't want any part of it. I doubt that they will have a problem with that either."
"Yeah, I'm not really big on dying just yet for some cash," Mychaila agreed. "The trial was fun, but maybe later in life, like a century from now."
I gave a small nod. All right.
"All right? You aren't going to mock us?"
"Why would I mock you?" For being cowards or being scared. Outland monsters terrify me, I told them honestly, and a look of surprise went across their faces. It would be hypercritical of me to make fun of you for being scared and valuing your lives. There's nothing wrong with that. This whole thing is completely messed up, and a good example of what these monsters can do, most likely killing people just outside these walls as we speak.
No shit. It would be a buffet out there for them,
Elias said half-heartedly, before giving me a strange look.
So why are you here if these monsters that you know so much about scare you?
Duty. And 500,000 other reasons, but they didn't need to know that.
That's pretty honorable for a chicken.
Yes, well, even chickens have claws, and can be really, really mean.
Couldn't tell you, never met one,
he said before throwing the discussion out the window.
I know we aren't friends, but I have a personal question.
I gave a confused look. What could be so personal that even Elias had the thought to ask permission? What would that be?
Are you scared of Outland monsters because of the Queen's death? I heard that...
I didn't hear the rest of it as I grimaced at the memory of my mother. Her screams from an illness no one could help. A flashing light as something large approached came to the foreground of a memory, and I sent it hurling back into the vault, bringing me back to reality. I didn't answer him as I tried to make sure the memory didn't return. He went to keep asking questions, but stopped, taking my glare into account. Mychaila cleared his throat, ending the tension. So, what's the plan? I dropped the glare, putting myself back in check. I stand as far away from the commander as possible to see if he can get his communications working. They didn't know better of what happened, and, frankly, it was for the best.
And what do we do?
Elias asked, finding his tongue again. You can go over to the commander, do whatever, really. If another Outland monster comes in here, we're going to have to fight it, though. But try to keep yourself from doing anything strenuous or drinking all your water if you brought any. We don't know how long we'll be stuck in here. Mychaila sat in the grass. Relaxation is my middle name. Suddenly, a yellow light traced itself in the field quickly, and the grass he sat in became sand, and the gloomy room dissipated, leaving a bright sun to glare down on us. The sounds of screaming and chaos echoed around us. I looked up to see that we were out of the labyrinth and in the middle of a battlefield. The space where the cube sat was clear for the most part of monsters, as it sunk back into the arena floor, but everywhere else I looked, the guard, dragon knights, dragons, and monsters were fighting as people were trying to leave. Someone's hat laid not far in a pool of blood. I swallowed. Hopefully whoever that belonged to was all right. The commander came over to us, drawing in my attention, but I was unable to voice out words. This was horrible. We need to leave, my lord. I can't just leave, not when... I didn't finish my sentence, as I noticed Mychaila stand next to Elias. Both were about 3 shades paler than earlier. Escort Mychaila and Elias to safety. But, Your Highness, that's a direct order, Commander Emmett, I stated firmly, surprising myself a bit as a large wolf-like monster caught my attention, fighting the other 2 groups of trial runners. I'm staying until all the trial runners are able to leave. The commander turned to where I was looking before turning back to me. He had a conflicted expression on his face, but he bowed. As you order, Prince Aerrow. The commander pushed the 2 boys, and it got them moving as I directed my attention to the huge monster, one of several, all in the empty space, along with some smaller ones like the ones I had met in the maze. Besides the rabbits, the bigger ones must have been what Owen had dragged in. I started running over to them. Day, where are you?
In the underground, protecting an exit, alone.
Well, that was the last thing I was going to tell her to leave from. I'm out, but I'm going to be with a few commanders. I'll leave to either join you or wherever they wish to escort me to, once I get these trial runners out of the middle of the stadium.
Can't just leave them alone, can you?
No, there is no way they'd make it out if they tried running with some of these monsters that were hiding in that labyrinth.
Do you see their dragons?
No. She gave out a sigh.
Don't do anything stupid.
I gave a simple nod, even though she wasn't there, and not one that was entirely truthful. I got up to the wolf to find it standing several meters tall, and a huge snake as its tail. The 2 commanders took point, while the 7 other trial runners stood nearby or behind. 4 of them were either brave enough or stupid enough to fight, while the others were similar to Elias and Mazea, and rethinking their life choices. They were probably in shock and needed to leave immediately. I stopped next to the 2 commanders as the monster's 2 heads took turns being designated attacker on the 4 trial runners. Commander Toll, Clart.
Prince Aerrow,
Toll started, turning to me, leaving Clart to pay attention to the monster.
What are you doing here? You should be with Emmett.
I ordered him on a different task while I help you leave.
Priority is a bit off. You should be...
I'm exactly where I need to be. I need one of you to get these 3 out of here. I motioned towards the 3 behind me, who weren't looking great. One of them was shaking. They aren't going to get killed in the middle of this.
My lord, you're going to get killed if you stay. Outland monsters are greatly attracted to you.
Then it should keep them occupied while you get these 3 to safety. The rest of us will slowly make our way from the middle of this until a dragon or 2 can come and retrieve us.
What has become of your dragon?
She's helping keep clear an exit in the underground. I can't ask her to come.
Seems like that's what all of our dragons are doing in some form or another. All right. Clart will take these 3. The 5 of us should be able to handle this Outland monster, and those 2 Outland monsters.
He looked behind me, and I followed his eye line to see I had drawn the attention of some weird reptilian chicken-like monsters. But instead of being chicken-sized, they were about 1.5 meters tall.
Prince Aerrow, may I suggest you take them? They use fire as an attack, and you are the best one suited for that job.
I nodded, feeling a bit weird to take orders, but went with it. Fire never bothered me anyway. On it.